Beijing, 1968. You wake before dawn not to an alarm clock, but to the sound of loudspeakers crackling to life on every street corner, broadcasting revolutionary songs at a volume that makes sleep impossible. The voice of Mao Zedong reading from his little red book echoes off concrete apartment buildings, mingling with the sound of 1 million people beginning their morning exercises in courtyards across the city. The smell of cabbage steaming in communal kitchens drifts through windows that cannot quite close against the northern cold. This is China in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, when ideology penetrated every corner of daily existence, when your words could be weaponized against you, when children denounced parents and neighbors informed on neighbors, when the simple act of cooking the wrong kind of food or wearing the wrong color shirt could mark you as a counter-revolutionary. But it was also a time when ordinary people found small ways to preserve their humanity, to protect their families, to survive with dignity in a world that demanded total submission. We think we know Maoist China, the propaganda posters, the red guards, the mass rallies, but what was it actually like to wake up each morning in a society where politics controlled everything? What you ate, where you worked, whom you could love, even what you could think. What did the cabbage taste like? How did you navigate the endless political meetings? Where did you find moments of genuine joy or connection in a system designed to atomize and control? Tonight, we are not going to analyze the politics or count the dead, though the dead number in the tens of millions. We are going to live through an ordinary day, to feel what it meant to be human in a society that claimed to be building paradise while creating something closer to a prison. If these journeys through difficult histories help you understand the resilience of the human spirit, stay with us. A gentle like helps others discover these stories, and subscribing means we can continue this work of remembering what must not be forgotten. In the comments, tell us what other difficult histories you'd like us to explore with honesty and care. For now, settle in. We are traveling to a China that no longer exists, to a time living memory still carries, to lives that were both ordinary and extraordinary in their quiet resistance to the impossible. The loudspeakers wake you at 5:30 as they do every morning. The voice is female, bright with revolutionary enthusiasm, and it is reading from Chairman Mao's quotations at a volume designed to penetrate walls, windows, sleep, and any remaining dreams of privacy. The people and the people alone are the motive force in the making of world history. The words echo off the concrete buildings of your housing complex, mingling with identical broadcasts from other loudspeakers on other streets, creating a blanket of sound that covers Beijing like fog. You do not reach for an alarm clock because you do not own one. You do not need one. The loudspeakers are your alarm, your morning news, your political instruction, and your reminder that even in sleep you are not separate from the collective, from the revolution, from the watchful presence of the party. You lie for a moment on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling where a crack runs like a river across peeling whitewash, and you think about nothing. Thinking about nothing is a skill you have cultivated. It is safer than thinking about something. Your wife stirs beside you, and in the other room you hear your daughter coughing, the deep, wet cough she has had all winter because the coal dust from the factory district hangs in the air like a permanent mist, and the apartment is cold despite the small coal stove you are rationed fuel for. Your son, 13, is already awake. You can hear him in the other room, probably reading his little red book, preparing for the day's political study. He takes it seriously in a way that both reassures and terrifies you. The apartment is 2 rooms in a building that houses 40 families, all assigned here by the Beijing No. 3 machine tool factory where you work as a mechanic. The rooms are small, perhaps 12 square meters total, and they contain everything your family of 4 owns. 2 beds pushed against opposite walls, a small table and 4 stools, a cabinet holding your clothes, which are not many, a coal stove for cooking and heat, a thermos for hot water, a wash basin, a portrait of Chairman Mao, mandatory, watching you from the wall with that serene smile that you have learned to see without seeing. You rise and dress in the dark, not wanting to waste the precious electricity ration by turning on the single bulb that hangs from the ceiling. Your clothes are what everyone wears, blue or gray cotton jacket and trousers, the uniform of the proletariat, practical and identical. You owned other clothes once, before the Cultural Revolution. A traditional qipao that your wife wore on special occasions, a Western-style suit that you inherited from your father. Those are gone now, destroyed during the campaign against the Four Olds. Old customs, old culture, old habits, old ideas. Wearing them would mark you as bourgeois, as clinging to the past, as insufficiently revolutionary. The apartment is cold enough that you can see your breath. Outside the window, Beijing is waking under a gray sky that might be dawn or might be the perpetual haze of coal smoke that blankets the city. You can see other windows in other buildings, identical apartments stacked like boxes, and in each one you can imagine families like yours, people rising to the same loudspeaker announcements, preparing for the same mandatory routines. You pour water from the thermos into the basin and wash your face and hands, the water lukewarm, preserving heat. There is no bathroom in the apartment. The toilets are communal, down the hall, shared by all the families on this floor. You will use them later, timing your visit to avoid the morning rush when a dozen people might be waiting. Privacy is not a concept that has much meaning here. You live your life in public, observed and observing, part of a vast mechanism of mutual surveillance. Your wife begins preparing breakfast in the alcove that serves as a kitchen. There is no real kitchen, just a small coal stove and a wooden board where she can chop vegetables. Breakfast is simple because all meals are simple. Congee made from rice that was rationed at the beginning of the month, stretched with water to make it last. A few pickled vegetables, salty and sour. Hot water in tin cups. This is what you eat most mornings, what most people in Beijing eat, though the cadres and high officials eat better in their special canteens where imported foods sometimes appear. While you eat, the loudspeaker continues its morning broadcast. News of production quotas being exceeded at factories across China, though you know the quotas are often fictional and the achievement of exceeding them is even more fictional. Warnings about class enemies infiltrating the revolution, reminders about the evening's political study session. The voice never stops, never tires, a constant stream of instruction and exhortation that has become like white noise, something you hear without listening. Your son eats quickly, eager to leave for school where his Red Guard unit meets before classes. He is wearing his armband, red cloth with yellow characters, Revolutionary Rebel. You watch him and feel the familiar mixture of pride and fear. Pride because he believes so completely in what he is doing, because his faith is pure and uncomplicated. Fear because you remember what happened to old Wu down the hall, denounced by his own daughter for listening to foreign radio broadcasts, sent to a re-education camp in Qinghai province from which he has not returned. "I will be late tonight," your son says, not meeting your eyes. "We have a struggle session against Teacher Wang. He has been teaching bourgeois mathematics." You do not ask what bourgeois mathematics means. You do not point out that mathematics is mathematics, that numbers cannot be politically incorrect. You simply nod and tell him to be careful, though you are not sure what being careful means anymore when children are encouraged to be reckless in their revolutionary fervor. After breakfast, you prepare to leave for the factory. Your wife will go later. She works the second shift in the factory canteen, preparing food for workers who could not go home for lunch. Your daughter, who is 8, will walk to school with the other children from your building, all of them wearing their red scarves, all of them having learned to recite Chairman Mao's quotations before they learned to read anything else. The walk to the factory takes 20 minutes through streets that are crowded despite the early hour. Everyone moves in the same direction, like a river of blue and gray, the uniform colors of revolutionary China. There are no cars except official vehicles, their black exteriors and curtained windows marking them as belonging to cadres. Everyone else walks or rides bicycles, thousands of bicycles creating a symphony of bells and chains, flowing around corners and through intersections with a kind of organized chaos. The streets themselves are covered with big character posters, dazibao, layer upon layer of them creating a palimpsest of denunciation and self-criticism. Some are new, the ink still wet, accusing people whose names you do not recognize of crimes you do not understand. Others are old and weathered, their accusations fading but not removed, because removing them would suggest doubt about their validity. The posters cover everything: walls, fences, the bases of trees, creating a landscape of text, of accusation, of political warfare conducted in brushstrokes and paste. You keep your eyes down, not reading the posters too carefully. Reading them is dangerous because you might see a name you know, might be called to testify about someone, might become implicated simply by knowing too much. Ignorance is safer. You have learned to move through the city seeing without seeing, hearing without hearing, present but not engaged. The factory gate looms ahead, flanked by red banners proclaiming production slogans: "Serve the people," "The East is red," "Long live Chairman Mao." A portrait of Mao hangs above the gate, and you bow your head slightly as you pass beneath it, the gesture so automatic now that you barely register doing it. Guards check your work pass, though they know you by sight. You have worked here for 15 years, since before the revolution, when the factory made different things and answered to different masters. Inside the gate, you join the morning assembly. This is mandatory, held in the central courtyard before each shift begins. Perhaps 300 workers stand in rough formation, arranged by workshop. A cadre stands on a platform at the front, flanked by red flags, and leads you through the morning ritual. "Respectfully wish Chairman Mao a long, long life," the cadre shouts. "A long, long life," 300 voices respond, you among them, the words emerging without thought or feeling, pure automatic response. "Respectfully wish Vice Chairman Lin Biao eternal health." Eternal health. The loyalty dance follows, everyone performing the same choreographed movements, raising arms as if holding the little red book, turning to face the portrait of Mao, stepping forward and back in synchronized rhythm. You move through the dance thinking about the machine you were working on yesterday, a lathe that keeps jamming, wondering if you can fix it or if you will need to report it to your workshop leader, which will mean filling out forms and attending meetings, and possibly being criticized for not maintaining equipment properly. After the loyalty dance comes the reading from Chairman Mao's quotations. Today, it is about self-reliance and hard struggle, which means production quotas are behind, and everyone will be expected to work harder without additional resources. You have learned to read between the lines of these morning sessions, to understand what is really being said beneath the revolutionary rhetoric.
Then, finally, you are dismissed to your workshops to begin the actual work. The machine shop where you work is a large space, poorly lit, filled with the sound of lathes and presses and the smell of cutting oil and metal dust. Your workstation is at the back, a lathe from the Soviet era, solid and reliable when it is working, which is not as often as it should be because replacement parts are scarce and the maintenance schedule has been disrupted by political campaigns. Your workshop leader is a man named Chen, 10 years younger than you, promoted not because of his technical skill, but because of his political reliability. His father was a poor peasant, which gives Chen a good class background, while your father was a small shopkeeper, which makes your background questionable. Chen is not a bad person, but he is cautious, always afraid of making a mistake that could be used against him, and this caution makes him a difficult supervisor. "The lathe," you say to him, gesturing at your machine. "It is still jamming. I need to replace the bearing." Chen frowns. "We have no bearings. The requisition from last month was denied." "Then I cannot meet my quota." "You will have to find a way. Perhaps you can borrow a bearing from another machine?" You want to point out that this is not how machines work, that you cannot just swap parts between different models, but you simply nod. Arguing accomplishes nothing except to mark you as difficult, as resistant to solving problems through revolutionary spirit rather than bourgeois technical requirements. The morning passes in work that is frustrating because you cannot do it properly without parts you do not have. You improvise, adjusting tolerances, working around the jamming bearing, producing parts that are functional but not to specification. Everyone does this. The entire factory operates on improvisation and acceptable failure, meeting quotas on paper while the actual quality deteriorates. But questioning this system openly is impossible, so you work and say nothing. At 10 o'clock, the loudspeaker interrupts for the mid-morning political study session. All work stops. Everyone gathers in small groups, and your workshop's study group consists of 8 workers sitting in a circle near your workstations.
You are holding your little red book. Everyone carries one, always, and Chen leads the session. Today we will study Chairman Mao's teaching on class struggle, Chen begins, opening his book to a marked page. Chairman Mao teaches us, never forget class struggle. Who can explain what this means for our work? A young worker named Liu raises his hand. It means we must always be vigilant against class enemies who try to sabotage production. Good, Chen says. Can anyone give an example? There is silence. This is the dangerous part, when you are expected to identify enemies, to offer up examples of suspicious behavior. You keep your eyes on your book, hoping someone else will speak first. An older worker named Sun speaks carefully. I have noticed that some workers waste materials. Perhaps this is unconscious sabotage influenced by bourgeois thinking. Chen nods. This is a good observation. We must all examine our work habits through the lens of class struggle. Are we serving the people or are we serving our own comfort? The discussion continues for 30 minutes, circular and repetitive, everyone saying the same things in slightly different words. You speak once, offering a vague comment about the need for greater revolutionary vigilance, and then you are silent. The session ends with a collective recitation of quotations, and then you return to work.
Lunch is eaten at the factory canteen, a large room with long tables where workers sit according to workshop. The food is ladled from large pots by servers who work quickly and without much care about portion size. Some bowls have more, some less, the randomness accepted as part of the system. Today it is steamed bread and stewed cabbage with a small amount of pork fat for flavor. You eat quickly, not because you are particularly hungry, but because eating slowly in a crowded canteen surrounded by noise and the smell of hundreds of people is not pleasant. Your wife is working in the canteen kitchen, and you catch a glimpse of her through the serving window. Her face flushed from the heat, her hair tied back with a cloth. You do not speak. You cannot show favoritism, cannot suggest that your relationship is more important than your work. She ladles food into bowls with mechanical efficiency, and if she sees you, she gives no sign. After lunch, there is a mandatory rest period when workers are supposed to study Chairman Mao's works or rest quietly. Many simply doze, exhausted from the morning's work and the evening political meetings they know are coming. You sit with your back against the wall of the workshop and close your eyes, but you do not sleep. You think about your daughter's cough, about whether you can trade some of your grain ration for medicine, about whether asking for medicine might be seen as putting individual needs above collective welfare. The afternoon shift passes like the morning. Work interrupted by political study, production hampered by lack of materials, everyone going through the motions of meeting quotas that everyone knows are inflated. At 4 o'clock, there is another assembly, this one to announce that tomorrow there will be a criticism session for workers who have shown insufficient revolutionary enthusiasm. Names are read. Yours is not among them, and you feel relief so profound it is almost painful. At 5:30, your shift ends, but you cannot go home yet. Tonight there is a mandatory political meeting, a criticism and self-criticism session where workers will confess their ideological failings and criticize each other's mistakes. These sessions can last for hours, and they are emotionally exhausting, a performance where you must demonstrate the correct level of revolutionary fervor without going so far that you make yourself a target. The meeting is held in the factory's assembly hall, several hundred workers sitting on wooden benches facing a stage. Chen is leading the session, reading from a document about the current political campaign against revisionism. You listen with half your attention, the other half focused on staying alert enough to respond if called upon, but not so alert that you appear eager, which could be interpreted as trying too hard to prove your loyalty. The self-criticism portion begins. Workers stand one by one and confess their errors. A woman admits she has been hoarding cooking oil, saving it for her daughter's wedding when she should have been using it to serve the people. A man confesses he has been reading old novels instead of studying Chairman Mao's works. Each confession is followed by criticism from other workers, a ritual of denunciation that you have learned to calibrate carefully. Criticize enough to show political consciousness, but not so viciously that you become known as an informer. When your turn comes, you stand and speak the formula you have prepared. I have been paying too much attention to technical problems and not enough to political study. I have let bourgeois expertise override revolutionary consciousness. I will do better. It is vague enough to be safe, specific enough to satisfy the requirement for self-criticism. People nod. Chen thanks you for your honesty. You sit down, relieved. The meeting ends at 8:30, nearly 3 hours after your shift ended. You file out with the other workers, everyone quiet now, exhausted by the performance. The loudspeakers are still broadcasting, though at lower volume now, playing revolutionary songs that drift across the darkening city. The walk home is slower than the morning walk. Your body aches from the day's work and the evening's stress. The streets are darker than they used to be. Electricity is rationed, and many streetlights are dark. But you know the way by feel, past the same buildings, through the same intersections, part of a river of workers flowing back to their assigned housing.
When you finally climb the stairs to your apartment, there is no elevator, you live on the 4th floor, and push open the door, you find your family waiting. Your wife has prepared dinner, more cabbage and steamed bread, and you eat together in the small room, the portrait of Mao watching from the wall. Your son tells you about school, about the struggle session against his teacher, speaking with the casual violence of youth that does not yet understand what these sessions cost. Your daughter coughs and picks at her food, not hungry. Your wife catches your eye, a look that communicates worry without words. Because even here, even in your own home, you must be careful what you say. The walls are thin, the neighbors listen. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford. After dinner, you help your daughter with her homework, which consists mostly of copying out Chairman Mao's quotations in careful characters. You check her work, praise her brushstrokes, tuck her into bed. Your son studies his little red book, preparing for tomorrow's political study. Your wife washes the dishes in cold water, trying to make no noise. And then, finally, when the apartment is dark and quiet, when everyone else is asleep, you sit for a moment at the table and allow yourself to feel the weight of the day. The constant performance, the endless political study, the fear that never quite leaves you, the awareness that anything you say could be used against you, that your children might denounce you, that tomorrow could bring an accusation that would destroy everything. But you are still here. Your family is still together. You have food, even if it is monotonous. You have housing, even if it is cramped. You have work, even if it is frustrating. You have survived another day in the danwei, in the system, in the revolution that promised to liberate you, but instead created new forms of bondage more total than anything that came before. You think about your father, who ran a small shop selling cloth before the revolution. You remember the shop's smell, the bolts of silk and cotton, the freedom of working for yourself. Your father died during the land reform campaigns, accused of being a petty bourgeois exploiter. You never speak of him. To speak of him would be to invite suspicion, to suggest nostalgia for the old society, to mark yourself as politically unreliable. But in this moment, in the darkness of your apartment with your family sleeping around you, you allow yourself to remember. Not the politics, not the ideology, just the simple fact of a man who loved his work, who took pride in his craft, who existed before the revolution made everything political, before every aspect of life became subject to surveillance and control. Tomorrow you will wake to the loudspeakers again, you will attend the morning assembly, perform the loyalty dance, participate in political study. You will work and eat and attend meetings and perform the endless rituals of revolutionary consciousness. You will survive, as you have survived every day for years now, by keeping your head down, by saying what is expected, by creating a protective shell of conformity around the small precious space where you remain yourself. This is life in the danwei. Not the heroic communism of propaganda posters, not the utopia promised by revolution, but the grinding reality of total control accepted as the price of survival. You are not free, but you are alive. You are not happy, but you endure. You are not the new socialist person the party wants to create, but you have learned to pretend convincingly. Outside, the loudspeakers have finally stopped, giving the city a few hours of quiet before morning comes and they start again. You close your eyes and try to rest, knowing that sleep will be brief and interrupted, that the patterns of surveillance and control continue even in darkness, that you are never truly alone, never truly private, never truly safe. But you are here. Your family is here. And tomorrow, somehow, you will find the strength to do it all again.
The night settles over Beijing, over millions of people in identical apartments, all living under the same system, all navigating the same impossible demands, all finding small ways to preserve their humanity in a society designed to eliminate individual identity and replace it with collective consciousness. Rest now in the knowledge that even total control cannot fully extinguish the human spirit, that people find ways to survive, to protect what matters, to maintain hope that this will not last forever. The danwei controls your work, your housing, your food, your movements, but it cannot control your dreams, the private thoughts you keep hidden, the love you feel for your family, the memories you preserve of a different time. Sleep, knowing that millions are sleeping with you, sharing your burden, and during this same daily struggle, you are not alone, even in a system designed to isolate and atomize. The quiet resistance of simply continuing, simply surviving, simply refusing to become entirely what the system demands. This is its own form of victory. Tomorrow will come. The loudspeakers will wake you, and you will rise again, and you will endure. The ration book is kept in the wooden cabinet along with your family's other essential documents, work permits, residence registration, political dossiers. It is a small booklet, plain paper with columns and stamps, but it is more valuable than money. Money, after all, cannot buy food in Maoist China. Only ration coupons can do that, and the coupons are distributed monthly based on your work unit, your household registration, and the current political climate. You take out the ration book on the first of each month when the new coupons are issued. Your wife stands beside you as you count them, both of you doing the mathematics that will determine how your family eats for the next 30 days. Grain coupons, 27 jin for you as a male industrial worker, 24 jin for your wife, 18 jin each for your children. A jin is about half a kilogram, so your family's total grain allocation for the month is roughly 87 jin, or about 43 kilograms of rice or wheat flour, or whatever grain is actually available. This sounds like enough until you remember that grain is not just rice or noodles, but the foundation of every meal, the substance that fills empty stomachs when there's little else. Vegetables are rationed separately, a few jin of cabbage, perhaps some turnips or winter melon, occasionally onions or garlic. Cooking oil comes in tiny amounts measured in liang, roughly 50 grams per person per month, so little that you measure it in drops rather than spoonfuls. Meat is the rarest luxury, appearing on your ration book perhaps once or twice a month, and then only a few hundred grams that must be stretched across 4 people. But having ration coupons is not the same as having food. You must still go to the state store and hope that what you are entitled to is actually available. This morning, like every morning during the first week of the month when your new coupons are fresh, you wake extra early to stand in line at the grain store before work. The line forms before the store opens, people materializing in the pre-dawn darkness, clutching their ration books and hoping to get rice rather than the coarse corn flour that has become more common since the bad harvest years. You take your place behind 20 or 30 others, all neighbors from your housing complex or the surrounding streets, people whose faces you know but whose thoughts you can only guess at. No one speaks much in these lines. There's nothing to say that is safe to say, and complaining about shortages could be interpreted as criticizing the system. The store opens at 6 and the line begins to move slowly. Inside, the shelves are mostly empty, displaying propaganda posters that proclaim agricultural abundance, while the actual produce consists of a few sacks of grain, some wilted vegetables, and canisters of cooking oil that look half empty. The clerk behind the counter is a woman in her 50s, tired-looking, who processes ration coupons with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times.
When your turn comes, you present your ration book and speak carefully. Grain for 4 people, please. She examines your coupons, tears out the appropriate stamps, and writes the amount in a ledger with deliberate slowness. Then she disappears into the back room and returns with 2 cloth bags. Rice is finished. This is mixed grain, mostly wheat flour, some corn flour. You accept the bags without complaint. Mixed grain makes coarser bread and grittier noodles, but it is food and you are in no position to be particular. She measures out your family's vegetable ration, mostly cabbage, as always, with a few withered carrots, and adds a small bottle of cooking oil, the liquid inside looking thin and yellowish. Meat, you ask, though you can see there is no meat on display. Maybe Friday, maybe next week. Keep checking. You nod and take your purchases, the bags heavy in your hands. This is your family's food for the next month, supplemented by whatever you can buy with the small amount of cash you have left after paying rent and utilities to your work unit. The weight of the bags is the weight of responsibility, of keeping your family fed, of making these finite resources stretch across infinite days. Back at the apartment, your wife is already awake, preparing breakfast on the small coal stove. The coal itself is rationed, distributed by the work unit in amounts calculated to provide heat and cooking fuel, but nothing extra for comfort or waste. She has learned to cook efficiently, using the minimum fuel necessary to heat water for tea and warm the leftover mantou, steamed bread, from yesterday. Breakfast is always the same: hot water in tin cups, sometimes with a few leaves of jasmine tea if you can afford it, usually just plain hot water that warms your stomach and gives the illusion of fullness. The mantou, dense and slightly sweet if made with wheat flour, heavy and coarse if made with corn flour. Perhaps some pickled vegetables, preserved from last year's harvest when there was a brief abundance, now rationed out a few pieces at a time to make them last. You eat quickly, standing at the small table, because there is no time to sit and linger. Your wife wraps mantou in a cloth for you to take to the factory for lunch, and you tuck this bundle into your jacket pocket. Many workers bring their lunch from home rather than eating at the factory canteen, saving their money for other necessities or for the black market, where occasionally you can buy things the ration system does not provide. Your daughter is picking at her mantou, breaking it into small pieces but not eating. "I don't like cornbread," she says quietly. Your wife's face tightens. "It is what we have. Eat." "But it tastes bad." You want to agree with her. The cornflour mantou does taste bad, gritty and bitter, nothing like the fine wheat flour buns you remember from before the revolution, when your mother made them for festivals with sugar and sesame seeds. But you cannot agree, cannot suggest dissatisfaction with what the state provides. "It makes you strong," you say instead. "Eat it and you will grow tall." She eats, obedient if not enthusiastic, and you feel the familiar guilt of lying to your child, of asking her to accept deprivation as normal, as good, as what she deserves. Your son has already left for school, taking his own lunch of mantou and pickled vegetables. At school, there is a canteen, but the food is no better than what you can provide at home, and sometimes it is worse. He has told you about classmates who faint during morning exercises, children from families whose rations are smaller or whose parents are being punished politically through reduced food allocations. Hunger, you have learned, is not just biological, but political, a tool of control as effective as any police force. The day passes in the rhythms of work we have already described, but lunch brings its own particular navigation. You find a quiet corner of the workshop and unwrap your mantou, eating it dry because there is nothing to drink except the hot water in the communal thermos that everyone shares. Around you, other workers are eating similar meals, though a few have managed to acquire small luxuries, a piece of preserved egg, some dried fish, items that must have come from the black market or from family in the countryside. The worker next to you, old Jiang, is eating what looks like white rice with actual pieces of meat. You try not to stare, but he notices your glance and speaks quietly.
My brother-in-law works at a government office. He gets better rations. There is no pride in his voice, just statement of fact. The hierarchy of eating in Maoist China is perfectly clear. Cadres and government officials eat better than factory workers. Factory workers eat better than farmers, and farmers, despite producing all the food, eat worst of all, especially after they are required to sell their entire harvest to the state at fixed prices. You think about the farmers in your wife's home village, people you visit once a year during spring festival if you can get permission to travel. They grow rice and wheat and vegetables, but they eat sweet potato and corn because everything else must be delivered to state collection points. During the bad years, the years you do not speak about openly, the years of the Great Leap Forward when the policies drove millions to starvation, the farmers ate bark and grass and clay mixed with what little grain they could hide from the collection teams. Your wife's younger brother died then, along with her grandparents, but you cannot say they died of starvation because acknowledging starvation means acknowledging policy failure, which is politically dangerous. Instead, you remember them as dying of illness or natural causes, even though everyone knows that the natural cause was hunger, that the illness was government-mandated grain collection that left villages with nothing. The memory sits in your stomach like a stone, making the dry mantu even harder to swallow. After work, instead of going straight home, you take a detour through the back streets near the factory. This is dangerous, potentially, because being seen in certain areas at certain times can raise questions. But you need cooking oil. Your family's ration ran out 3 days ago, and cooking without oil means dry, tasteless food that your daughter is already refusing to eat. The black market in Beijing is not a market in any formal sense. There are no stalls, no signs, no permanent location. Instead, it is a network of connections, of whispered conversations, of people who have access to things. You are looking for Auntie Wong, an old woman who sometimes has goods to trade, though where she gets them is a question you know better than to ask. You find her in the alley behind a residential building, sitting on a small stool with a basket beside her that is covered with a cloth. She looks up as you approach, her eyes assessing, calculating. "Oil?" you ask quietly. She lifts the cloth slightly, revealing bottles that look like they might contain cooking oil, though the labels are missing or obscured. 3 yuan for half a jin. This is 5 times what you would pay at the state store if the state store had oil, which it does not, but you need oil, and she knows you need oil, and the price is what it is. You reach into your pocket and count out the money, precious yuan that you have saved from your wages, and she hands you a bottle that flashes with golden liquid. "Don't tell anyone," she says, though this is unnecessary. Everyone who participates in the black market knows that speaking of it is dangerous. The government officially denies that black markets exist, which means admitting you use them is admitting the official ration system is insufficient, which is criticizing the system, which is politically suspect. You tuck the bottle inside your jacket and walk home by a different route, just in case anyone is watching, just in case someone might wonder where you got the bulge in your jacket. The paranoia is exhausting, but necessary. You have seen neighbors accused of hoarding, of profiteering, hauled away for investigation because someone reported seeing them with food they were not supposed to have. When you arrive home, your wife takes the oil without comment and hides it in the back of the cabinet behind the ration books and the family's spare clothes. Tonight, she will cook with just a few drops of it, making stir-fried cabbage that will taste better than anything you have had all week, and your daughter will eat without complaint, and no one will ask where the oil came from, because not asking protects everyone. Dinner is the most substantial meal of the day, though substantial is a relative term. Tonight it is rice. You have been careful with your grain ration, making it stretch by mixing it with cheaper grains, and the stir-fried cabbage with the precious black market oil, and a thin soup made from vegetable scraps and a small piece of pork fat that gives it flavor if not actual meat. Your family eats together at the small table, the portions carefully measured so that everyone gets their fair share. Your son, growing and always hungry, gets slightly more than your daughter. You and your wife take the smallest portions, the parental instinct to feed your children first overriding your own hunger. This is what every family does, what you see reflected in your neighbors' gaunt faces and your coworkers' thin frames. The rice is filling in a way the mantou is not, and you eat slowly, making it last, trying to convince your stomach that this is enough. Your daughter's cough has improved slightly. Perhaps the better food is helping, or perhaps it is just coincidence. Your wife has saved a small piece of pork fat and gives it to your daughter, watching to make sure she eats it, knowing that the fat and protein might help her recover. After dinner, your wife boils water for washing the dishes and for the family's evening tea. Tea is rationed like everything else, but you have a small jar of jasmine tea that your wife's family sent from the countryside, smuggled in someone's luggage, a gift that is technically illegal because transporting food across provincial boundaries without authorization is prohibited. But the tea makes the evening bearable, the fragrant steam rising from the tin cups, the warmth spreading through your body, the brief moment of pleasure in a day otherwise devoid of it. Your wife is washing dishes when she speaks quietly, her voice barely above a whisper even though you are alone in your apartment. Next week is your mother's birthday. We should try to make jiaozi. Jiaozi, dumplings, are the traditional food for celebrations, for festivals, for marking important occasions. Making them requires wheat flour, which you have, but also meat and vegetables for filling, and oil for frying or boiling, resources that are precious and carefully rationed. But your mother is 73, and who knows how many more birthdays she will have, especially living alone in her small room in another part of the city, subsisting on the minimal rations allocated to the elderly. We could use some of our grain ration for the wrappers, you say, thinking aloud, and maybe trade with old Lou. He has connections at the butcher. He might be able to get us some pork. It is risky, your wife says, but her tone suggests she has already decided it's a risk worth taking. Food is not just fuel in Chinese culture. It is memory, tradition, connection to ancestors and to the past. Making jiaozi for your mother's birthday is an act of resistance against a system that wants to erase all personal celebrations, all traditional customs, all the four olds that make you Chinese rather than revolutionary. The next day, you approach old Lou during the lunch break, speaking casually as if discussing work. My mother's birthday is next week. I was hoping to make something special for her. Lou understands immediately. I might be able to help. I have a friend who works at the No. 7 meat processing plant. How much do you need? Half a jin would be enough. He names a price that makes you wince, 2 days' wages for half a kilogram of pork, but you agree. This is what it costs to preserve tradition, to honor your mother, to maintain the thread of culture that connects you to ancestors who made jiaozi for their elders' birthdays long before the revolution.
The pork arrives 3 days later, wrapped in newspaper, exchanged quickly in the factory bathroom where no one can observe the transaction. You hide it inside your jacket and carry it home, your heart beating faster than it should, knowing that being caught with unauthorized meat could lead to questions, investigations, accusations of profiteering or hoarding. That evening, after your children are asleep, you and your wife prepare the dumpling filling. The pork is chopped fine and mixed with cabbage and ginger, precious ginger that your wife has been saving for months, grown in a small pot on the windowsill where official eyes cannot see it. Growing your own food is technically allowed, but practically discouraged. All land belongs to the collective, and private cultivation suggests bourgeois individualism. You make the dumpling wrappers from wheat flour mixed with water, rolling them thin, your wife's hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who learned this skill from her mother, who learned it from her mother, an unbroken chain of women making dumplings stretching back centuries. Your daughter wakes and comes to watch, and your wife teaches her how to fold the dumplings, the pleats just so, creating the traditional crescent shape. "Why are we making these?" your daughter asks, her small fingers clumsy with the dough. "For your grandmother's birthday," your wife explains. "This is what we always make for birthdays. This is what my mother made for me when I was your age, and what her mother made for her." "But Teacher Lee says old customs are feudal, and we should only celebrate revolutionary holidays."
You exchange a glance with your wife. Your daughter is right. The school teaches that traditional festivals and family celebrations are remnants of the old society that must be eliminated. Spring festival, mid-autumn festival, family birthdays, all these have been suppressed or replaced with revolutionary commemorations. But here, in your apartment with the door closed and the curtains drawn, you are reclaiming something precious. Teacher Lee is not wrong, your wife says carefully, but some customs are about love and respect, not about the old society. Honoring your grandmother is not feudal, it is being a good person. This is a delicate balance you must teach your children, how to navigate between official ideology and human decency, between what they must say in public and what they can believe in private, between performing revolutionary consciousness and maintaining actual humanity. The jiaoziers finished past midnight, dozens of them arranged on a board, ready to be boiled tomorrow when you will take them to your mother's apartment. You and your wife are exhausted but satisfied, having created something beautiful and traditional in a society that official wants to erase both beauty and tradition. The next evening you make the journey across the city to your mother's apartment, carrying the jiaozi in a cloth-covered basket. The trip requires careful planning. You need a good excuse for traveling across districts, a plausible reason for carrying a basket, a story ready in case anyone asks questions. You decide to say you were returning borrowed tools to a friend, which is vague enough to be believable. Your mother lives in a single room in a building even more crowded than yours, her space barely large enough for a bed and a small table. She is thin, has been thin since the Hunger Years when she gave her own food to you and your siblings, and she has never quite recovered the weight. But her eyes light up when she sees the jiaozi, and her hands shake slightly as she touches the cloth covering them. You should not have, she says, which is both proper modesty and genuine concern. It is too dangerous. It is your birthday, Mother. How can we not celebrate? You boil the jiaozi on her small coal stove, and your family, you and your wife and your 2 children and your mother, crowd around her small table to eat them. They are delicious in a way that transcends mere flavor. Delicious because they represent effort and sacrifice, because they connect you to tradition and family, because they are a small act of defiance against a system that wants to control even how you celebrate your mother's life. Your mother cries as she eats, tears running down her lined face, and you know she is thinking about all the birthdays that came before, when your father was alive, when there was enough food, when celebrating did not require stealth and risk. But she is also smiling, and in this moment, in this small room with your family gathered around, you feel something that has been absent for a long time. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy that has nothing to do with politics or revolution or serving the people. Joy that is just human, just family, just the pleasure of sharing food with people you love.
The months pass in their rhythm of scarcity and careful management. Some months there is a little more, some months a little less, depending on harvests and political campaigns and factors you cannot control or predict. You learn to make cabbage interesting in 100 different ways: pickled, stir-fried, boiled in soup, mixed with the few other vegetables you can obtain. You learn to make grain stretch by mixing expensive wheat flour with cheaper corn flour, by cooking rice as kanji diluted with extra water, by never wasting a single grain that falls to the floor. You learn the black market's rhythms, when Auntie Wong might have eggs, when old Liu's friend at the meat plant might have scraps to sell, when farmers from the countryside sneak into the city with produce that bypasses official channels. You learn to trade favors and information, to barter your repair skills for food, to navigate the informal economy that everyone participates in but no one acknowledges. And you learn what cannot be learned, only endured. The constant low-level hunger that never quite goes away, the feeling of never being quite full, the way your clothes hang looser each year despite remaining the same size, the way your children's growth seems slower than it should be, the way elderly people like your mother simply fade, their bodies consuming themselves in the absence of adequate nutrition. But you also learn resilience, creativity, the 1,000 small ways that people preserve their humanity despite the system's attempt to reduce them to interchangeable units of production. You learn that food is memory,
that the taste of jiaozi on your mother's birthday carries the weight of centuries, that the secret jar of preserved vegetables your wife makes in defiance of regulations is an act of cultural preservation as important as any museum. When Spring Festival comes, officially now called Spring Holiday and stripped of most traditional observances, you still make what celebrations you can. You save ration coupons for weeks to afford a chicken, nearly impossible to obtain but essential for the traditional meal. You make niangao, the sticky rice cake, even though the sugar required means foregoing other things. You paste paper cuttings on your windows until someone reminds you that this is one of the 4 olds and you reluctantly take them down, though you save them, hidden, for next year. Your children are growing despite the inadequate food, becoming people who have known nothing but this system, this scarcity, these endless political campaigns. They eat their cabbage and mantou without complete because they do not remember when food was different, more abundant, less controlled. This is both tragic and fortunate. Tragic because they have been cheated of the richness of Chinese cuisine. Fortunate because they cannot mourn what they never knew. In quiet moments, you remember the food of your childhood, the dishes your mother made, the festivals with their special foods, the abundance that was not actually abundance but simply normality, the ability to eat until you were satisfied rather than until your ration was consumed. These memories are dangerous, suggesting nostalgia for the old society, but you cannot help remembering. And sometimes, late at night when the loudspeakers are finally silent and your family is asleep, you stand at your small window looking out at the dark city and you imagine a future where your children can eat without counting coupons, where food is something to enjoy rather than merely survive on, where celebrating your mother's birthday with jiaozi does not require secrecy and risk. It is a small dream, almost embarrassingly modest, just the wish for adequate food, for the freedom to eat and celebrate as your ancestors did for thousands of years before the revolution decided that such things were futile and must be eliminated. But in Maoist China, even small dreams are dangerous. Even modest wishes suggest insufficient revolutionary fervor. So you keep them quiet, locked inside where only you can know them, and you return to your bed where your wife is sleeping, thin but alive, enduring like you are enduring, surviving on cabbage and mantou and the occasional black market oil, keeping your family fed day by day, month by month, year by year, hoping that someday, somehow, things might be different. Tomorrow, the ration coupons will need to be counted again. Tomorrow, there will be lines at the state store and careful calculations of how to make too little food last too many days. Tomorrow, you will eat cabbage again, will drink hot water and pretend it is tea, will fill your stomach without filling it, will feed your children first and yourself last. But tonight you can rest, knowing that you have kept them alive another day, that you have preserved some small fragment of tradition and culture, that you have made jiaozi for your mother's birthday despite everything. It is enough. It has to be enough. Sleep now, knowing that millions are doing the same calculations, making the same sacrifices, preserving the same fragments of humanity against a system that wants to erase individual identity and replace it with collective consciousness. The ration book controls what you eat, but it cannot control the memories you carry, the traditions you preserve in secret, the love you put into feeding your family despite impossible constraints. Tomorrow will come. The lines will form, the coupons will be counted, and you will continue, one meal at a time, one day at a time, surviving. Your daughter leaves for school at 7:30, her red scarf knotted carefully around her neck, her book bag containing more copies of Chairman Mao's quotations than actual textbooks. She is 8 years old, and she can recite long passages from the Little Red Book, but struggles with basic arithmetic because mathematics instruction has been deemed less important than political consciousness. You watch her walk down the stairs with the other children from your building, all of them wearing identical red scarves, all of them chattering about the morning's flag ceremony and which class will be selected to lead the revolutionary songs. You remember when you first sent her to school 3 years ago, hopeful that she would receive the education you never had, that the revolution's promise of universal literacy would give her opportunities you never enjoyed. And in some ways, this has proven true. She can read and write, skills that were far from universal in the old society. But what she reads is limited to approved texts, and what she writes consists mostly of self-criticisms and essays praising Chairman Mao. The school is a 10-minute walk from your apartment building, a concrete structure built in the rush of the 1950s when the government was constructing schools and hospitals and housing at a pace that prioritized quantity over quality. The building is already deteriorating. Cracks in the walls, windows that do not close properly, plaster falling from the ceilings. But it serves its purpose, which is not comfort, but the transformation of children into revolutionary successors. You have been inside the school only once, during a mandatory parent meeting where the principal explained the new curriculum. That was 2 years ago, just after the Cultural Revolution began, when everything changed. The principal, a nervous man who had taught history before being promoted, stood before a room full of anxious parents and explained that education would now focus on serving the people and learning from the masses rather than on bourgeois knowledge that had no practical application. Chairman Mao teaches us that our education policy must enable everyone who receives an education to develop morally, intellectually, and physically and become a worker with both socialist consciousness and culture, the principal had said, reading from a prepared text. What this meant in practice was that traditional subjects, literature, history, advanced mathematics, would be reduced or eliminated, replaced by political study, revolutionary songs, and manual labor. The parents had sat in silence because what could they say? Questioning education policy was questioning the revolution itself, was suggesting you cared more about your child's individual advancement than about serving the people. And so you had nodded and applauded when required, and you had gone home and said nothing to your daughter about your concerns, because children were encouraged to report politically suspect statements made by their parents. The school day begins, as all days begin, with the flag-raising ceremony. Your daughter stands in the courtyard with 300 other students, arranged in rows by grade, all facing the flagpole where the red flag with its yellow stars hangs limp in the still morning air. The principal stands on a platform, and beside him are several students from the Red Guard unit, teenagers wearing armbands and expressions of fierce dedication. "Salute the flag," the principal commands, and 300 small hands rise in unison. The flag rises slowly up the pole while revolutionary music plays from loudspeakers mounted on the school building. Your daughter has told you about this ceremony, how they perform it every morning regardless of weather, how in winter their hands freeze while holding the salute, how students who do not salute with sufficient enthusiasm are called out and criticized. After the flag reaches the top of the pole, the principal leads the students in the morning pledge. "We respectfully wish Chairman Mao a long, long life. We wish him a long life without bounds." "A long, long life," the students shout in response, your daughter's voice among them, high and clear and utterly sincere. Then comes the recitation from the Little Red Book. Today it is a passage about self-reliance and hard struggle. The principal reads first, and then the students repeat, their voices creating a wave of sound that echoes off the concrete buildings surrounding the courtyard. "Be resolute, fear no sacrifice, and surmount every difficulty to win victory." Your daughter has memorized dozens of these quotations. She recites them while doing her homework, while washing her face in the morning, while falling asleep at night. The words have become a kind of background music to her life, shaping how she thinks and speaks even when she is not conscious of it. After the flag ceremony, the students file into their classrooms. Your daughter's classroom is on the second floor, a large room with peeling paint and windows that let in winter cold and summer heat with equal efficiency. 40 students sit at wooden desks arranged in neat rows, each desk scarred with the initials and doodles of previous students. At the front of the room hangs an enormous portrait of Chairman Mao, his face serene and fatherly, watching over the class. The teacher, Miss Chen, is young, perhaps 25, and she has been teaching for only 3 years, having been assigned to this school directly after graduating from the Teachers Training Institute. She is earnest and nervous, someone who genuinely believes in the revolution, but who also fears making mistakes that could be used against her.
Your daughter likes Miss Chen, talks about her at home with a child's uncomplicated affection, unaware that Miss Chen's position is precarious, that one accusation from a student or a parent could end her career or worse. The first class of the day is political study, which occupies the same time slot that used to be devoted to Chinese literature. Miss Chen stands at the front of the class with her own copy of the Little Red Book and begins reading. Chairman Mao teaches us, the world is yours as well as ours, but in the last analysis it is yours. You, young people, full of vigor and vitality, are in the bloom of life, like the sun at 8 or 9 in the morning. Our hope is placed in you. The students listen with varying degrees of attention. Some, like your daughter, are genuinely engaged, their faces showing the earnest concentration of children trying to understand important adult concepts. Others are clearly daydreaming, though they have learned to maintain expressions of attentiveness to avoid criticism. A few are taking notes, copying down the quotation even though they already have it memorized. Miss Chen asks the students what this quotation means. Hands shoot up immediately. Eagerness to answer is a sign of political consciousness, while hesitation suggests insufficient enthusiasm for Chairman Mao's teachings.
A boy in the front row is called upon. It means that we young people are the future of the revolution. We must study Chairman Mao's thought and dedicate our lives to building socialism. Very good, Miss Chen says. Who else can explain the meaning? Your daughter raises her hand, and Miss Chen calls on her. She stands beside her desk, as is required when speaking in class. It means that Chairman Mao has great hope for us. We are like the morning sun, full of light and warmth. We must not disappoint him. Excellent. And how do we avoid disappointing Chairman Mao? By studying hard and serving the people, by criticizing the four olds and old thinking, by being revolutionary successors. The answer is perfect, exactly what is expected, and Miss Chen smiles with approval. Your daughter sits down, pleased with herself, not understanding that the question itself is problematic, that making children responsible for not disappointing a political leader is a form of psychological manipulation, a way of binding their self-worth to their political performance. The political study continues for another 40 minutes. The students discuss what it means to serve the people, how to identify bourgeois thinking in themselves and others, why the four olds must be eliminated. They are 8 and 9 years old, and they are discussing these concepts with the seriousness of ideologues, their childhood innocence weaponized in service of political indoctrination. The second class is mathematics, but it is mathematics transformed by politics. The problems in the textbook are not abstract exercises, but revolutionary parables expressed in numbers. Problem 1, Miss Chen writes on the blackboard. The People's Liberation Army liberated a county and captured 458 Kuomintang soldiers. They liberated another county and captured 629 more. How many enemy soldiers were captured in total? The students work through the problem, and several raise their hands to give the answer. The mathematics is simple addition, appropriate for their grade level, but the context ensures that even mathematics class becomes an opportunity to reinforce revolutionary narratives, to celebrate the party's military victories, to frame all knowledge within political categories. Problem 2. A production brigade harvested 12,000 jin of grain. They sold 8,500 jin to the state. How much grain did they keep for themselves? Your daughter solves this problem easily and writes the answer in her notebook, 3,500 jin. But she does not question why the brigade sold most of its harvest to the state, does not know about the mandatory grain quotas that left farmers hungry while warehouses filled, does not understand that problems like this one normalize a system where those who produce food often have the least of it. After mathematics comes a break, and the students flood into the courtyard for morning exercises. They line up in formation and perform calisthenics in unison, movements designed to promote physical fitness, but also to reinforce discipline, obedience, collective action. Your daughter stretches and bends with the others, her small body moving in sync with 300 others, a drop in the ocean of identical movements. The third class is language, but language class bears little resemblance to what you studied at her age, when students read classical poetry and learned to write characters through copying ancient texts. Now, the reading material consists almost entirely of Chairman Mao's speeches, revolutionary poems, and stories about model workers and revolutionary martyrs. Today they are reading a story about a young boy who denounced his father for hiding grain from the collective during the land reform campaigns. The father was executed, and the son became a revolutionary hero, celebrated for placing loyalty to the revolution above loyalty to family. Miss Chen reads the story aloud, her voice solemn, and then asks the students what they think. "The boy did the right thing," one student says immediately. "He loved Chairman Mao more than his father." "His father was a class enemy," another adds. "The boy was very brave to expose him." Your daughter listens to this discussion with a troubled expression that you would recognize if you could see it, though she quickly smooths her face into acceptable blankness. At home, she has asked you about stories like this, about whether children should really report their parents. You have navigated these questions carefully, saying that honesty is important, but also that families should protect each other, trying to preserve some sense of family loyalty without explicitly contradicting what she is being taught. But the message of stories like this is clear and repeated constantly. Political loyalty supersedes all other loyalties. Family, friendship, personal affection, all of these are less important than devotion to Chairman Mao and the revolution. Children are being trained to see themselves as extensions of the state, as having obligations to the collective that override their obligations to their own parents. After language class comes lunch, eaten at the school canteen. The food is similar to what you eat at the factory: steamed bread and vegetables, occasionally some thin soup with a few pieces of tofu. The students eat quickly and without much talk, refueling for the afternoon's classes. The afternoon begins with revolutionary songs. This is your daughter's favorite part of the school day, and she has told you about it with genuine enthusiasm. The teacher leads them in singing, and the students' voices rise together in songs that celebrate the revolution, the party, Chairman Mao. The east is red, the sun rises. China has brought forth Mao Zedong. He works for the people's welfare. He is the people's great savior. Your daughter loves to sing, and her voice is clear and sweet. At home, she sings these songs while playing, while helping with chores, the revolutionary lyrics as natural to her as nursery rhymes were to children of earlier generations. You listen to her singing about how Chairman Mao is the sun in the sky, and your heart breaks a little, because she believes it completely, because her faith is pure and unquestioning.
After singing comes manual labor. This is a recent addition to the curriculum, part of the policy that students must learn from workers and peasants, must understand that mental and manual labor are equally valuable. In practice, this means that twice a week, your daughter's class spends the afternoon doing simple tasks: sweeping the school courtyard, pulling weeds from the vegetable garden that the school maintains, sorting items in the school's small workshop where older students learn basic manufacturing. Today, they are working in the garden, and your daughter spends 2 hours pulling weeds under the supervision of a teacher. Her hands become dirty, her clothes dusty, but she does not complain. She has been taught that manual labor is glorious, that intellectuals who think they are above physical work are displaying bourgeois attitudes that must be criticized. You remember a different attitude toward education, when studying was valued precisely because it allowed you to escape manual labor, when parents, like yours, worked back-breaking jobs so that their children could become teachers or clerks or accountants. But that attitude has been labeled feudal, elitist, counter-revolutionary. Now, students are taught to aspire to be workers and peasants, to see manual labor as the highest calling. The school day ends at 4 o'clock, and your daughter walks home with the other children from your building.
She is tired, her clothes dirty from the garden work, but she is chattering about the day's political study session, about how Miss Chen said her answer was excellent, about the revolutionary song they learned. At home, she has homework, but it is not what you would recognize as educational. She must write a self-criticism, examining her own thoughts and actions for signs of bourgeois influence or incorrect political thinking. She must memorize another passage from the Little Red Book. She must write an essay titled, "How I Will Serve the People." These assignments take perhaps an hour, and she completes them diligently, wanting to please Miss Chen, wanting to be a good revolutionary successor. You help her with her homework, even though it pains you, even though you want to tell her that there is more to learning than memorizing political slogans, that mathematics exists beyond word problems about grain production, that the great literature of China was not all feudal garbage to be destroyed. But you cannot tell her these things, because she might innocently repeat them at school, because children's careless words have destroyed families.
Your son's education is different and more dangerous. He's 13, and for the past year, he's been a Red Guard, part of the student movement that has turned China's schools into battlegrounds. He comes home late most evenings, his clothes sometimes torn, his knuckles sometimes bruised, and he tells you about the struggle sessions he has participated in, the teachers and intellectuals his unit has criticized, the 4 olds they have destroyed. Last week, they attacked their school principal's home, the same nervous man who had explained the new curriculum to you. They ransacked the apartment, looking for evidence of bourgeois lifestyle, old books, antique furniture, anything that suggested connection to the old society. They found a set of porcelain cups from before the revolution, beautiful things with blue and white patterns, and they smashed them in the street while the principal and his wife watched, weeping. Your son tells you this story with excitement, with the fervor of a true believer, and you listen with your face carefully neutral, because you cannot let him see your horror, cannot give him any reason to question whether you support what he is doing. Red Guards have denounced their own parents, have stood on platforms accusing their fathers of being hidden counter-revolutionaries. You cannot risk becoming a target of your own child's revolutionary enthusiasm. Teacher Wang tried to defend the cups, your son says. He said they were just dishes, that they had no political meaning, but we explained to him that keeping such things shows bourgeois nostalgia for the old society. After we smashed them, he understood and thanked us for helping him eliminate these feudal remnants. You doubt very much that the principal genuinely thanked them, but you say nothing. This is the language of the Cultural Revolution. Coerced confessions presented as grateful acknowledgments, violence framed as education, destruction called liberation. Your son's school has been closed for months now. Universities have been closed for even longer. The entire education system has collapsed into political warfare, with students spending their days in struggle sessions and raids rather than in classrooms. Your son has learned nothing academic this year, but he has learned how to denounce people, how to identify signs of bourgeois thinking, how to perform revolutionary fervor with convincing intensity. And he has learned that there is power in ideology, that a 13-year-old boy can make adults cower, can destroy people's possessions and reputations, can be celebrated for actions that in any other context would be called bullying or vandalism. This power is intoxicating, and you see it in his eyes, the belief that he is part of something important, that he is making history, that he is purifying China of its old, corrupt elements. Last month, his Red Guard unit went to the home of one of his former teachers, an old man who taught classical Chinese literature. They dragged him into the street and made him kneel on broken glass while they accused him of poisoning students' minds with feudal culture. They cut off his long scholar's beard, which he had maintained despite pressure to adopt revolutionary appearance.
They burned his books, thousands of books, a lifetime of collection, in a pile in front of his house. Your son describes this with the same excited tone he uses to describe a football match, and you want to weep, want to shake him and tell him what they are destroying, want to explain that those books contained the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of Chinese civilization. But you cannot. You can only nod and say that he must be careful, must not let revolutionary fervor lead to excess, must remember that Chow Mao teaches us to be disciplined in our struggle. He barely listens. He is 13 years old, and he has been given license to attack anyone he deems insufficiently revolutionary. He is part of something larger than himself, swept up in a movement that has taken millions of teenagers and transformed them into an army of ideological enforcers. He does not understand that he is being used, that the chaos and violence serve political purposes he cannot comprehend, that he and his fellow Red Guards are weapons being wielded by factions fighting for power at levels far above his understanding.
But there are also moments when you see cracks in the indoctrination, moments when your children's natural intelligence and curiosity push against the narrow boundaries of acceptable thought. One evening, your daughter asks you a question that makes your blood run cold. "Papa, why did we have to destroy all the old books?" You freeze, trying to determine if this is a genuine question or a test, if someone has told her to ask this, if she's reporting your answer. But her face shows only confusion, childish puzzlement, and you decide to risk an answer. "The old books contained ideas from the old society," you say carefully. "Chairman Mao teaches us that we must make way for new revolutionary culture." "But Miss Chen says books are precious. She says we should protect books and read them carefully. How can some books be precious and others need to be destroyed?" This is the contradiction at the heart of the educational project, teaching children to value learning while telling them that most of what previous generations learned must be eliminated. You do not know how to answer without either contradicting official policy or lying to your child. "That is a good question," you say finally. "You should ask Miss Chen to explain it." Your daughter accepts this, moving on to other topics, but the question lingers. You wonder how many other children are asking similar questions, how many are beginning to notice the contradictions, how many will grow up to question what they have been taught. That night, after your children are asleep, you stand at your small window and think about what has been lost. Your own education was limited, your family was poor, and you could only attend school until age 14 before you had to begin working. But in those few years, you learned classical Chinese, read Tang Dynasty poetry, studied the Confucian texts that had been the foundation of Chinese education for thousands of years. You remember your favorite poem, lines from Li Bai that you memorized as a child. "Before my bed the bright moonlight gleams, like frost upon the ground, it seems. I raise my head to watch the moon, then lower it and think of home." Simple words, but they captured something universal about longing and distance, something that connected you to centuries of readers who had felt the same ache of separation. That poem and thousands like it have been condemned as feudal garbage. Your children will never read Li Bai, never know that Chinese culture created some of the most beautiful poetry in human history. Instead, they memorize revolutionary slogans that will be forgotten or revised within a few years, that serve political purposes of the moment rather than expressing timeless human experiences. They are being impoverished in ways they cannot recognize because you can only miss what you know you have lost.
There are teachers, you have heard, who continue to teach real subjects in secret, who hide books and share them with trusted students, who preserve the old knowledge despite the danger. There are families who whisper banned poems to their children, who tell forbidden stories from Chinese history, who keep the culture alive in underground ways that carry enormous risk. But you are not brave enough to do this. The stakes are too high. You have seen what happens to those accused of preserving feudal culture: struggle sessions, re-education camps, families destroyed. Your responsibility is to keep your family safe, and safety means compliance, performance, accepting that your children will receive an education that teaches them how to recite quotations, but not how to think. Your son will likely be sent to the countryside within a few years, part of the up to the mountains and down to the villages movement that is shipping millions of urban youth to rural areas to learn from the peasants. He will spend years doing agricultural labor instead of attending university, and by the time the policy changes, if it changes, he will have missed the opportunity for higher education entirely. Your daughter might have a different fate, but it will not necessarily be better. The future is uncertain, the policies change constantly, and what is orthodoxy today may be heresy tomorrow. All you can do is try to protect her as best you can, to keep her safe while hoping that somehow, someday, she will have the opportunity to learn what she is currently being denied. As the months pass, the education system continues its chaotic transformation. Some schools are closed entirely, others operate sporadically, opening for a few weeks before closing again for political campaigns. Teachers are denounced and sent to labor camps, replaced by workers and soldiers who have political reliability but no teaching experience. Your daughter's school remains open, but the curriculum continues to narrow. Classical Chinese is eliminated entirely, replaced by simplified characters and revolutionary texts. History class becomes a study of class struggle, with Chinese history rewritten to emphasize peasant rebellions and ignore cultural achievements. Science education continues, but only in its most practical applications, basic physics and chemistry that can be applied to industrial production, nothing theoretical or abstract. And yet your daughter continues to love going to school, continues to believe in what she is being taught, continues to sing revolutionary songs with genuine feeling. She is happy, or what passes for happiness, in a system that defines happiness as political consciousness and service to the collective. She has friends, she performs well in class, she is becoming a model student in the new revolutionary education system. You watch her growing into this system and you feel grief for what she could have been, for the education she could have received, for the breadth of knowledge and culture that should have been her birthright as a Chinese person. But you also feel gratitude that she is adapting, that she is succeeding on the terms the system offers, that she is safe. Because in the end, safety is what you can provide. Not education in any meaningful sense, not knowledge of Chinese culture and history, not the ability to think critically or question authority, just safety, the basic parental duty to keep your children alive and unharmed in a society that values ideological purity over human flourishing. It is not enough. It has never been enough, but it is all you have. The loudspeakers are broadcasting revolutionary songs into the night, the familiar melodies drifting through your window. Your children are asleep, dreaming dreams you can only imagine, dreams shaped by the education they are receiving, by the constant political messaging, by the little red book that sits by both their bedsides. Tomorrow your daughter will wake and recite Chairman Mao's quotations. She will go to school and raise the flag and promise loyalty to a political leader she has never met. She will solve mathematics problems about grain production and enemy soldiers captured. She will sing songs about the sun rising in the east and believe every word. And you will wake and go to work and attend political meetings and perform your own revolutionary consciousness. You will say nothing about what has been lost, nothing about the education your children are being denied, nothing about the culture being destroyed in the name of progress. This is what it means to be a parent in Maoist China, not guiding your children toward knowledge and independence, but protecting them through silence, through compliance, through teaching them to perform loyalty while hoping that somewhere inside they preserve some capacity for independent thought that might survive until times change. If times change, if the revolution ever ends, if China ever remembers that it had a civilization worth preserving before it decided to destroy it all and start over. These are thoughts you cannot speak, cannot even acknowledge to yourself most of the time, but tonight, in the darkness, with your children sleeping and the city quiet except for the loudspeakers, you allow yourself to think them. And then you let them go, because thinking them changes nothing, because tomorrow will come regardless, because your children need you to be strong and careful and silent.
Sleep now. Rest while you can. Tomorrow there will be more political study, more revolutionary songs, more education that is not education. Tomorrow your children will continue their transformation into revolutionary successors, and you will watch and say nothing, protecting them the only way you can, by keeping quiet, by surviving, by enduring. It is enough. It has to be enough. You wake one morning to find a crowd gathered in the courtyard of your apartment building, people clustered around the wall near the entrance, speaking in low voices. Your stomach tightens immediately. Crowds mean something has happened, and in these times, something happening usually means someone is in trouble. You join the edge of the crowd and see what they are looking at. A large poster, maybe 2 meters wide and 1 meter tall, covered with bold black characters written in angry, accusatory brushstrokes. The poster denounces old Chen from the 4th floor, the retired teacher who lives alone and minds his own business, who has lived in this building for 15 years and harmed no one. But the poster claims he is a hidden rightist, that he has been secretly listening to foreign radio broadcasts, that he has made reactionary statements criticizing the Great Leap Forward, that he represents exactly the kind of class enemy who must be rooted out and destroyed. The poster is signed by the Neighborhood Revolutionary Committee, which means it is official, which means old Chen's life has just changed irrevocably, which means association with him has become dangerous. The crowd reads in silence, some faces showing satisfaction. Old Chen was never friendly, always kept to himself, and some people enjoy seeing the proud brought low. But most faces show only the careful blankness that protects you from being accused of having opinions. You do not know if the accusations are true. You have barely spoken to old Chen beyond brief greetings in the stairwell. But truth is not really the point of these posters. The point is performance, demonstration of revolutionary vigilance, the creation of enemies who can be publicly struggled against to prove that the revolution continues, that class struggle never ends, that constant purification is necessary. You move away from the crowd before anyone notices how long you have been standing there, before someone might ask what you think about old Chen's crimes. Having no opinion is safer than having the wrong opinion, and you have learned that the right opinion today might become the wrong opinion tomorrow as political winds shift. By the time you return from work that evening, 3 more posters have appeared, plastered over the first, each one adding new accusations, new crimes discovered by newly vigilant revolutionary masses. Old Chen hoarded grain during the famine years. Someone remembers seeing him with extra rice. Old Chen owns books published before liberation. A search of his apartment revealed classical texts. Old Chen once worked for the Kuomintang. Someone has discovered his employment history from 30 years ago. The accumulation of accusations creates its own reality, a paper trail of crimes that may or may not be true, but that becomes true through repetition, through the weight of collective denunciation. Old Chen has not been seen since the first poster appeared. He is either hiding in his apartment or has already been taken for questioning by the neighborhood committee. 3 days later, there is a struggle session in the courtyard.
The struggle session is announced through the loudspeakers and by word of mouth. Attendance is mandatory for all residents of the building, a chance to demonstrate your own revolutionary consciousness by participating in the criticism of class enemies. You file down to the courtyard with your neighbors, perhaps 200 people, arranging yourselves in a semicircle around a small platform that has been set up for the occasion. Old Chen is brought out by members of the neighborhood committee, young men and women wearing red armbands who grip his arms tightly though he is not resisting. He is wearing a tall paper dunce cap with his crimes written on it, and around his neck hangs a wooden board listing his name and the accusation, Hidden Rightist Chen Wei-min. He has been made to bend at the waist in the jet plane position, arms pulled behind his back, a posture that is painful to maintain and that forces him to look at the ground rather than at his accusers.
The leader of the session is a woman from the neighborhood committee, perhaps 30 years old, someone who used to work at the textile factory but who has found a new role in these political campaigns. Her voice is loud, practiced, carrying across the courtyard. Chen Wei-min, look at the revolutionary masses you have betrayed. Confess your crimes. Old Chen's voice is barely audible. I have made mistakes. I failed to reform my thinking. I deserve criticism. Speak louder. The people cannot hear your confession. He tries to raise his voice, but it still comes out as a croak. I listened to foreign radio broadcasts. I kept books from the old society. I spoke words that showed insufficient revolutionary consciousness. This is the ritual of confession, the expected performance where the accused must acknowledge crimes, whether they committed them or not, must demonstrate proper submission to revolutionary justice. But the committee leader is not satisfied with this bare admission. You are not sincere. You are trying to hide your deeper crimes. Tell us about your counter-revolutionary thoughts. Tell us how you opposed the Great Leap Forward. Old Chen's legs are shaking. He has been standing in the jet plane position for perhaps 20 minutes, and at his age the physical strain is considerable. I expressed doubt about production quotas. I suggested that reported numbers were exaggerated. I was wrong. I failed to trust the people's revolutionary enthusiasm. A murmur goes through the crowd. This is a more serious admission, criticism of the Great Leap Forward policies that led to famine, policies that cannot be openly criticized without being labeled a rightist. Old Chen has just confessed to a thought crime, to insufficient faith in the revolution. Now comes the participatory portion, where members of the crowd are expected to speak up, to add their own accusations, to demonstrate their own political consciousness by attacking the designated enemy. A woman from the second floor steps forward. Chen Wei-min treated me with contempt. When I greeted him in the stairwell, he barely responded. This shows his bourgeois arrogance, his belief that he is superior to working people.
A man you work with at the factory adds his voice. I saw him reading a newspaper with a critical expression. He was clearly harboring reactionary thoughts about our socialist system. The accusations pile up, each one building on the last, transforming ordinary moments, a distracted greeting, a facial expression while reading, into evidence of counter-revolutionary thinking. You stand silent, hoping no one will notice your silence, hoping that not participating will be interpreted as political consciousness rather than as sympathy for the accused. But then the committee leader's eyes sweep across the crowd and land on you. Comrade Lee, you live in this building. What crimes have you observed? Your heart races. This is the moment you have feared, when silence is no longer possible, when you must either denounce someone or mark yourself as suspect. The crowd has turned to look at you, waiting, and you can feel the weight of their expectations. You clear your throat and speak, hating yourself as the words emerge. I have noticed that Comrade Chen keeps to himself, rarely participates in neighborhood activities. This may indicate bourgeois individualism. It is the safest accusation you can think of, vague enough to mean nothing, but specific enough to satisfy the requirement that you participate. The committee leader nods, accepting your contribution, and her attention moves to someone else. The session continues for another hour, Old Chen forced to stand in his painful position while accusation after accusation is hurled at him, while he is made to confess to crimes both real and imagined, while the crowd participates in his ritual humiliation. By the end, he is barely able to stand, his legs giving out, held upright only by the young men gripping his arms. Finally, the committee leader announces the verdict. Old Chen will be sent to a May 7th cadre school for re-education through labor, where he will learn to reform his thinking through agricultural work and political study. His apartment will be reassigned to a revolutionary family with better political credentials. His possessions will be examined, and any counter-revolutionary materials will be confiscated. The crowd disperses, people returning to their apartments with expressions of relief that it was Old Chen and not them,
that they have survived another political performance, that they successfully demonstrated their own revolutionary consciousness by participating in someone else's destruction. You climb the stairs to your apartment feeling contaminated, complicit. You denounced old Chen, added your voice to the chorus of accusation, and while your accusation was minor compared to others, you still participated in his downfall. This is what the struggle session accomplishes. It makes everyone guilty, everyone implicated, ensuring that no one has clean hands, that everyone has reasons to fear being exposed. Your wife looks at you when you enter, a question in her eyes. You shake your head slightly. Not here, not now, too dangerous to discuss. Your daughter is doing her homework at the table, writing self-criticisms, and she has learned from the struggle session, absorbed its lessons about how power works, about how collective denunciation functions.
"Papa, why did old Chen have to wear that hat?" she asks, her voice curious rather than troubled. "Because he made mistakes and must be criticized so he can reform his thinking," you answer automatically, the official explanation flowing out without thought. "But he seemed very old and tired. Why did they make him stand like that?" This is a more dangerous question, one that suggests sympathy for the accused, and you must be careful how you answer. The people must see that no one is above criticism, that age or status does not protect you from revolutionary justice if you hold incorrect thoughts. She nods and returns to her homework, apparently satisfied, and you feel the familiar shame of teaching your daughter the logic of cruelty, of normalizing violence by explaining it in calm, reasonable tones. But what choice do you have? She must learn to navigate this system, must understand its rules, must develop the instincts that will keep her safe, and the first rule is that anyone can become a target, that the line between accuser and accused is thin and constantly shifting, that survival requires constant vigilance and careful performance of loyalty. The next morning, old Chen's apartment is being cleared out, his possessions carried down the stairs in boxes by members of the neighborhood committee. You see them taking his books, armloads of them, titles you cannot read from this distance, but that represent a lifetime of collection, knowledge accumulated across decades. The books will be burned or pulped, turned into revolutionary toilet paper, their contents deemed too dangerous to exist. Among the possessions being removed, you notice a violin case. You had not known old Chen played violin, had never heard music from his apartment. The instrument will likely be destroyed as a bourgeois affectation, as evidence of attachment to Western culture, as proof of his insufficient commitment to revolutionary austerity. The next morning, old Chen's apartment is being cleared out. A new family moves into his apartment within a week, a young couple with good proletarian backgrounds. The husband is a factory worker, the wife works in a collective farm commune. They receive old Chen's apartment as a reward for their political reliability, and they move in without apparent guilt or discomfort about displacing someone who lived there for 15 years. This is how the system works. Denunciation creates opportunities for advancement, creates vacant apartments and jobs and positions that can be distributed to the politically reliable. This creates incentives for accusation, for finding enemies, for the constant churn of struggle sessions that destroy some people while elevating others.
The big character posters multiply across the city like a disease. Every wall, every fence, every surface that can hold paste becomes covered with denunciations, accusations, defenses, counter-accusations. Walking through Beijing means navigating a landscape of text, of political warfare conducted in brushstrokes and paste. Some posters attack high-level officials, party members accused of taking the capitalist road, of betraying Mao's revolutionary vision. These posters appear and disappear quickly as political factions fight for power at levels far above ordinary people's understanding. You learn not to read these too carefully. Knowing too much about elite power struggles is dangerous, can make you a target if you appear to support the wrong faction. Other posters attack ordinary people, teachers accused of spreading bourgeois knowledge, doctors accused of serving the rich preferentially, shopkeepers accused of hoarding goods or charging unfair prices.
Every profession, every position comes under scrutiny, and the posters create an atmosphere of constant suspicion where anyone might be the next target. Some posters are defensive, written by people trying to clear their names after being accused, trying to prove their loyalty, trying to demonstrate that they are victims of false accusation by class enemies. These posters are desperate, their tone pleading, and they rarely succeed because defending yourself too vigorously suggests you have something to hide. You pass these posters on your way to and from work, and you develop a technique of looking without reading, of moving your eyes across the characters without processing their meaning, of appearing engaged enough to avoid suspicion while remaining ignorant enough to avoid complicity. This is a skill everyone develops, the art of strategic ignorance, of knowing just enough to navigate the political environment while knowing too little to be held accountable. Your workplace, the machine tool factory, has its own ecosystem of posters covering the walls of workshops and dormitories and canteens. These posters primarily target factory leadership, managers and engineers accused of putting production over politics, of emphasizing technical expertise over revolutionary consciousness, of being capitalist roaders who want to restore the old system. One poster catches your attention despite your attempts to avoid engagement. It denounces your workshop leader, Chen, the young man who got his position through political reliability rather than technical skill. The poster accuses him of being a false revolutionary, of secretly sympathizing with the old technical experts, of sabotaging production through incompetence while hiding behind his proletarian background. The accusation is being made by a rival faction within the factory, and you recognize this as part of the larger power struggle happening everywhere in China. The Cultural Revolution is not just about class struggle or ideology, it is about power, about different groups competing for control using the language of politics as their weapon. Chen sees you reading the poster and approaches, his face pale. "This is a false accusation. I have always been loyal to Chairman Mao. You know this. You have worked with me for years." You nod carefully, not committing yourself. Tomorrow, Chen might be in old Chen's position, forced to stand in the jet plane posture while the crowd denounces him. Or tomorrow his faction might win, and the people who wrote this poster might be the ones being struggled against. The only safe position is neutrality, appearing to support whoever currently holds power, while maintaining enough distance to switch sides when power shifts. You should write a response poster, defend yourself by demonstrating your revolutionary credentials. He nods miserably and walks away, and you return to your work, relieved that for now you are not the target, that your name is not on any poster, that you can continue your careful navigation through the political minefield.
The mass rallies are even more theatrical than the struggle sessions, spectacles of loyalty performed on a scale that staggers the imagination. You attend one at the Workers' Stadium, summoned by your work unit along with tens of thousands of other workers from factories across Beijing. The stadium is packed, perhaps 80,000 people filling the stands and the field, all of them waving little red books, all of them shouting slogans in unison. On the stage at one end of the field stand the leaders of the rally, Revolutionary Committee members, Red Guard representatives, political cadres, their voices amplified through loudspeakers that make their words echo off the stadium walls. "Long live Chairman Mao! Long live! Long live! Long live!" 80,000 voices respond, a roar of sound that you can feel in your chest, a collective enthusiasm that seems to take on physical form. You wave your little red book with the others, you shout the slogans with the others, you perform loyalty with the same intensity as everyone around you. Part of you marvels at the choreography of it, at how effectively the rally channels collective energy, at how the repetition and the crowd and the volume create a kind of emotional high that feels almost religious. You can see people around you weeping with fervor, their faces shining with genuine belief, and you wonder if they are performing or if they truly feel what they appear to feel.
Part of you also calculates, watching to see who shouts loudest, who waves their book most enthusiastically, who shows the most visible emotion. Because these rallies are also surveillance mechanisms, places where political consciousness is displayed and judged, where insufficient enthusiasm can be noted and remembered. The rally lasts for 3 hours. Speakers denounce capitalist roaders and foreign imperialists and revisionist traitors. They celebrate the victories of the revolution and call for greater vigilance against class enemies. They read from Chairman Mao's works and lead the crowd in revolutionary songs. And through it all, the 80,000 participants perform their loyalty, demonstrating their commitment through volume and synchronized movement. By the end, your throat is raw from shouting, your arm aches from waving the book, your head throbs from the noise and the emotional intensity. You file out with the crowd, everyone exhausted but also strangely energized, having participated in something larger than themselves, having been part of a collective experience that momentarily dissolved individual identity into mass consciousness. The walk back to your neighborhood is quieter than usual, people drained by the rally, moving through the streets like spent fireworks. You think about what you just participated in, about the power of collective performance, about how easily individual judgment can be overwhelmed by group dynamics. And you think about old Chen, about whether he attended rallies like this in his younger days, whether he waved his book and shouted slogans and performed loyalty just as you did today. Because everyone performs, everyone participates, everyone demonstrates revolutionary consciousness, whether they believe it or not. And yet some people still get denounced, still end up wearing dunce caps and confessing to crimes. The randomness of it is perhaps the most terrifying aspect. You can do everything right, perform perfectly, demonstrate impeccable loyalty, and still become a target if someone decides to write a poster about you, if political winds shift, if your background is examined and found wanting, if you simply have something someone else wants, your apartment, your position, your spouse.
At home, your son tells you about a rally at his school, smaller than the one you attended, but no less intense. His Red Guard unit struggled against several teachers, forcing them to confess to spreading bourgeois knowledge, to corrupting students with feudal thinking. One teacher was beaten when he refused to confess, and your son recounts this with the same casual tone he might use to describe a sporting event. Teacher Liu would not admit that he was teaching counter-revolutionary literature, your son says, so we had to help him understand the seriousness of his crimes. After we corrected his attitude, he was much more willing to confess. Corrected his attitude is a euphemism for violence, and you know this, and your son knows that you know this, but neither of you can speak directly about what actually happened. The language of the Cultural Revolution is thick with such euphemisms. Struggle becomes education, violence becomes correction, fear becomes revolutionary consciousness. You want to tell your son that beating a teacher is not education, that forcing confessions through violence does not produce truth, that what he is doing is wrong regardless of its political justification. But you cannot tell him this, because he might report your words, because doubt about the revolution's methods is itself counter-revolutionary, because protecting him means allowing him to participate in things you find morally abhorrent. This is the impossible position parents occupy, wanting to instill values of kindness and justice while teaching children to survive in a system that punishes kindness as weakness and perverts justice into political theater. You are raising your son to be both perpetrator and potential victim, teaching him to demonstrate revolutionary fervor while hoping he never becomes a target of that same fervor. Your daughter has been quieter since the struggle session against old Chen. She has stopped asking questions about why things happen the way they do, has learned that some questions are dangerous, that curiosity about the wrongness of things marks you as politically suspect. One evening, she draws a picture at the table while you and your wife prepare dinner. When you look at what she has drawn, you see old Chen in his dunce cap, bent over in the jet plane position, surrounded by figures with angry faces. It is a child's drawing,
simple lines and basic shapes, but it captures something essential about what she witnessed. "Why did you draw this?" you ask carefully. She looks up, her expression unreadable. "We were told to draw pictures showing revolutionary justice. Teachers said we should draw struggle sessions to help us remember that class enemies must be criticized." So, this is now part of education, having children create art depicting political violence, normalizing it through repetition and creative engagement. Your daughter is being trained to see struggle sessions as normal, as necessary, as something to document and commemorate rather than to question or resist. You do not know what to say. You cannot tell her to stop drawing such things because that would be criticizing revolutionary education. You cannot praise the drawing because that would be endorsing the violence it depicts. You simply nod and return to preparing dinner. One more small moment of moral compromise in a long series of such moments.
The political performances continue day after day, week after week, month after month. The struggle sessions and the rallies and the poster campaigns never end because the revolution never ends, because class struggle must continue indefinitely, because there are always new enemies to identify and struggle against. You learn the rhythms of it, the ebb and flow of campaigns, the signs that indicate when a new movement is beginning and when an old one is winding down. You learn to read the official newspapers for hints about which way political winds are blowing, which officials are rising and which are falling, which ideas are currently orthodox and which have become heretical. You learn to modulate your own performance, showing enthusiasm when it is required, but not so much enthusiasm that you draw attention, participating in denunciations when called upon, but not volunteering accusations, maintaining the careful balance between visibility and invisibility that offers the best chance of survival. And you learn that everyone is performing, that the most fervent revolutionaries might be the most cynical performers, that genuine belief and calculated performance are impossible to distinguish, that perhaps they are not even different things, that performing loyalty long enough transforms you into someone who is loyal, that the mask eventually becomes the face. Some nights you lie awake wondering who you really are beneath all the performance, whether there is anything left of the person you were before the revolution demanded constant political consciousness. You remember a time when you could have thoughts without examining them for political content, when you could speak without calculating every word, when you could trust that your children would not denounce you. But that time is gone, if it ever really existed outside your memory's distortions. This is the world you live in now, the world your children are growing up in, the world that demands constant performance of loyalty and constant vigilance against enemies real and imagined. You close your eyes and try to sleep despite the loudspeakers still broadcasting their revolutionary songs into the night, despite the knowledge that tomorrow will bring more political study and more performances and more careful navigation of the impossible distance between what you are told to believe and what you know to be true. The eternal revolution continues, and you continue with it, one small life swept along by forces larger than you can control or even fully comprehend. But you endure. Somehow, against everything, you endure.
The door closes behind you, and for the first time all day you can drop the mask. The political meeting has ended, the struggle session is over, the mandatory study group has dispersed. You stand in the small entryway of your apartment and feel the accumulated tension of the day begin to release from your shoulders, though it never fully leaves. Even here, in this space that should be private, you must be careful. The walls are thin, the neighbors are close. But for a moment, behind your own closed door, you can breathe without measuring each breath for political correctness. Your wife looks up from the table where she has been mending clothes, and something passes between you without words, a look of recognition, of shared exhaustion, of mutual understanding that requires no explanation. You have been married for 16 years, since before the revolution, and you have developed a language of glances and silences that communicates what cannot be said aloud.
She stands and brings you a cup of hot water. Not tea because your tea ration ran out 3 days ago, just plain hot water that warms your hands and gives you something to hold. Her fingers brush yours as she passes the cup, the touch brief but deliberate, a moment of physical connection in a society that has made even such simple intimacy suspect, politically questionable, evidence of putting personal relationships above revolutionary commitment. Your mother sits in the corner, as she does every evening, working on embroidery by the light of the single bulb. She is 73, and she has lived through more changes than she can count. The collapse of the Qing dynasty, the warlord period, Japanese occupation, civil war, land reform, the Great Leap Forward, and now this. She embroiders flowers onto a pillowcase, tiny delicate stitches creating beauty that serves no revolutionary purpose, that expresses no political consciousness, that is simply beautiful for its own sake. This embroidery is an act of quiet resistance, a preservation of skills passed down through generations of women, a refusal to let the revolution erase every trace of the old culture. Your mother learned embroidery from her mother, who learned it from hers, an unbroken chain of women creating beauty with needle and thread stretching back centuries. The Cultural Revolution has condemned such handicrafts as feudal, as bourgeois affectation, but your mother continues anyway, working in the privacy of your apartment where revolutionary committees cannot see. "How was the meeting?" your wife asks, though the question is pro forma, because she knows how all such meetings are, tedious, frightening, requiring constant vigilance about what you say and how you say it. "Long," you answer, which conveys everything without saying anything actionable. Your son is not home yet. He's at a Red Guard meeting that will likely last until midnight. Your daughter is asleep in the other room, exhausted from school and the evening's homework of copying Chairman Mao's quotations. It is just the three of you and your wife and your mother, and in this configuration, something like honesty becomes possible.
You met your wife before the revolution, when such meetings were not subject to political scrutiny, when love was still considered a personal matter rather than a political one. It was 1950, in the brief window between liberation and total control, when the new government was still consolidating power and had not yet extended its reach into every aspect of daily life. She was working in a textile factory, one of thousands of young women who had come to the cities seeking opportunities that the old society had denied them. You were an apprentice mechanic, learning your trade, young and full of a cautious optimism about the future. You met at a neighborhood dance organized by the union, one of those events where young people gathered with the blessing of the new order, which wanted to promote healthy socialist relationships to replace the arranged marriages of the feudal past. You remember the way she looked that evening, wearing a simple dress that was neither traditional nor Western, something in between, appropriate for the transitional moment. You remember dancing with her, awkward because neither of you really knew how to dance, making up steps and laughing at your own incompetence. You remember walking her home through streets that still felt new and strange, everything familiar yet transformed by the change in government. The courtship was brief by traditional standards, but felt leisurely compared to what would come later. You met on weekends, walked in parks, attended political lectures together because that was what young revolutionary couples did. You talked about your lives, your families, your hopes for the future in a new China that promised equality and opportunity for all. When you asked her to marry you, it was still a question you could ask without requiring permission from your work unit, without needing approval from neighborhood committees, without undergoing political screening to ensure your backgrounds were compatible. You simply asked, and she said yes, and that was enough. The wedding was modest, held in a community hall with your families and friends attending. There was no elaborate traditional ceremony. Those had been condemned as feudal and wasteful. But neither was there the later requirement to demonstrate revolutionary purity, to incorporate political content into every aspect of the celebration. It was simply a wedding, two people committing to share their lives, witnessed by those who cared about them. You moved into a single room in a collective housing unit, and you were happy in a way that seems almost impossible to remember now.
You were young and in love and believed that the revolution would create a better world, that your children would grow up in a society without the injustices and inequalities that had marked the old China. The first years of marriage were not easy. You were poor, work was hard, political campaigns came and went with increasing frequency. But you had each other, and in the privacy of your small room you could be honest, could express doubts and fears, could laugh at the absurdities of the political slogans you had to repeat each day. Your mother-in-law moved in with you after your father-in-law died during the Great Leap Forward, officially of illness, actually of starvation when the grain requisitions left nothing for farmers to eat. She was silent about his death, speaking of it only once, late at night when she thought you were asleep, telling your wife in a whisper that he had given his own food rations to his grandchildren and slowly wasted away. Now your mother lives with you, widowed when your father died in a work accident. 3 generations in 2 rooms, the extended family structure that has been typical in China for millennia, though now it exists not by choice but by necessity. Housing is assigned by work units, and there is no private market where you could buy something larger. Your daughter was born in 1966, the year the Cultural Revolution began, and from her first breath she has known nothing but this. You remember holding her as an infant, looking at her tiny, perfect face and feeling terror that you could not protect her, that you could not control what kind of world she would grow up in. The birth itself required permission from your work unit, though the one-child policy had not yet been formalized. You had to demonstrate that your political standing was sufficient, that your housing situation could accommodate a child, that you were financially stable enough to raise a revolutionary successor. The process took months of applications and interviews, and during that time you lived in fear that permission would be denied, that your wife's pregnancy would be classified as unauthorized. When permission finally came, the relief was overwhelming, but so was the awareness of what it meant, that the most intimate aspects of your life, the decision to have a child, the creation of a family, were subject to state control, requiring approval from bureaucrats who knew nothing about you beyond your file. Your wife gave birth in a hospital that was understaffed and undersupplied, where the midwife was competent but overworked, where there was no privacy and little comfort. But she survived, and your daughter was healthy, and you brought them home to the cramped apartment where your mother had prepared what celebration she could, a few eggs saved from the ration, some special soup made from ingredients she would not reveal. Naming your daughter required careful consideration. Traditional names, especially those with classical literary references, had become suspect. You wanted to give her a name that would protect her, that would not mark her as coming from a family attached to the old culture. You settled on Hong, meaning red, a revolutionary color, paired with a character meaning flower, red flower, a name that would pass any political screening, that would mark her as a child of the revolution. But in private, your mother called her by a different name, a traditional name chosen from the family genealogy, a name that connected her to ancestors stretching back generations. You never corrected your mother, never insisted she use the official name, because these small preservations of tradition felt important, a thread connecting your daughter to a history larger than the revolution. Raising her has been an exercise in contradiction. You teach her to be obedient to political authority while hoping she develops the judgment to question it. You encourage her to succeed in school while knowing that the education she receives is impoverished, stripped of the richness of Chinese culture. You praise her revolutionary enthusiasm while secretly mourning the childhood she is being denied, the games and stories and freedoms that children should have. Your son was born 3 years earlier, and raising him has been even more complicated. At 13, he has become someone you barely recognize, transformed by the Cultural Revolution into a young zealot who speaks the language of denunciation with disturbing fluency. You remember him as a small boy, gentle and curious, asking endless questions about how things worked, delighting in simple pleasures.
That boy is gone, replaced by this red guard who comes home from struggle sessions, whose knuckles are sometimes bruised, who speaks of teachers and intellectuals with contempt.
You do not know how to reach him, how to remind him of kindness when the entire society rewards cruelty, how to preserve his humanity when being humane is considered politically suspect. But sometimes, late at night when he thinks no one is watching, you see glimpses of the child he was. A moment of tenderness with his younger sister, a look of uncertainty when discussing something he participated in. These moments give you hope that the transformation is not complete, that beneath the revolutionary performance, something of your son survives. Your wife's hands are rough from years of work in the factory canteen, the skin cracked and reddened from constant exposure to water and harsh detergents. She is 41 now, and she looks older, worn down by the years of scarcity and stress, by the endless political meetings and the fear that never quite leaves. But there are moments when you see the young woman you married, when her face relaxes into genuine laughter at something your daughter says, when she sings while cooking despite having nothing but cabbage to cook, when she catches your eye and you both understand the joke that cannot be spoken aloud. Maintaining intimacy in a society that politicizes everything has required creativity and persistence. Physical intimacy is not discussed. Sex is considered a private biological necessity, not something to celebrate or enjoy, and certainly not something to speak about openly. Your apartment offers no privacy. Your children sleep in the next room, your mother in a corner of the main room, the walls thin enough that every sound carries. But you find moments. Early mornings when everyone else is still asleep, late nights when exhaustion has claimed everyone but you, stolen afternoons when your mother takes the children out and you have the apartment briefly to yourselves. These moments are precious and rare, islands of connection in a sea of public performance. The emotional intimacy is harder to maintain. You have learned to speak in code, to communicate important things through ordinary words, to protect each other through strategic ignorance. When your wife asks you about your day, you tell her about production quotas and broken machinery, safe topics that reveal nothing actionable. When she tells you about her work, she speaks of kitchen management and ration distribution, avoiding anything political. But underneath this safe conversation runs a deeper communication. The way she touches your hand when you are anxious, the way you bring her tea when she is tired, the small acts of care that express what cannot be said, that you are in this together, that you will protect each other as much as possible, that, despite everything, love persists. Marriage in Maoist China has become something different than what you imagined on your wedding day. It is not romance or passion or the partnership of equals working toward shared goals. It is survival strategy, mutual protection pact, collaborative performance of political acceptability. But within these constraints, something genuine exists, something that has survived every political campaign, every struggle session, every moment of terror. Your mother is dying, though she does not speak of it, and neither do you. She is 73, and her health has been declining for months. A cough that will not resolve, weight loss despite eating her full ration, a tiredness that goes beyond ordinary fatigue. You know that in a society with better medical care, with adequate nutrition, with less stress, she might live many more years, but this is not that society. She spends her days sitting in her corner doing her embroidery, telling stories to your daughter when no one else is around. The stories are dangerous. Folk tales from before the revolution, family histories that include landlords and merchants, memories of festivals and traditions that have been condemned as feudal. But your mother tells them anyway, whispering them to your daughter, preserving what she can of the old culture before she dies and takes it with her. You do not stop her, because you understand that this is her final act of resistance, her way of ensuring that some thread of continuity survives, that your daughter knows she comes from a culture older and richer than the revolution. If your daughter understands and chooses to preserve these stories, something will survive. If she denounces them, well, your mother will be gone anyway, beyond the reach of struggle sessions and re-education camps. One evening, your mother calls you to her corner and speaks quietly, her voice thin but clear. "When I am gone, there is the box hidden under the floorboard beneath my bed. Do not look in it while I live, but after I die, open it. Inside are things you will want to keep hidden but not destroyed. You will know what to do." You nod, understanding that she has preserved something. Letters, photographs, documents from before the revolution, items that could be used as evidence of bad family background or bourgeois connections. She is trusting you with dangerous knowledge, giving you the choice of what to preserve and what to destroy. "I will be careful, Mother."
You have always been careful. Too careful, perhaps, but these times require it. She pauses, her breathing labored. "I am sorry for the world your children are growing up in. This is not what we hoped for." "I know, Mother. But they are strong. They will survive, and perhaps they will see better times." This is as close as she will come to criticizing the revolution, and it is only possible because she is old and dying and beyond caring what consequences her words might bring. You do not respond, because even in this moment of intimacy, you cannot bring yourself to speak openly against the system, cannot break the habit of careful speech that has kept you safe. She returns to her embroidery, and you return to the table where your wife is preparing the evening meal. The moment of honesty passes, absorbed back into the necessary silence that protects you all. There are other families in your building navigating the same impossible terrain, maintaining private lives under constant surveillance, finding ways to preserve humanity in an inhuman system. You hear fragments of their struggles through the thin walls, arguments about politics, whispered conversations late at night, the sound of children being scolded for saying the wrong things in public. The Wang's family in the apartment below you have a daughter who was sent to the countryside 2 years ago as part of the educated youth movement. She writes letters home that must pass through censors, so the letters speak of revolutionary fervor and productive labor and learning from the peasants. But Mrs. Wang weeps when she reads them, understanding the coded language, the hints of exhaustion and homesickness and conditions that are harsh beyond what the letters can say. The Wang's son, who is your son's age, was injured during a Red Guard action, beaten by a rival faction during a struggle session that turned violent. He came home with broken ribs and a concussion, and for weeks his parents lived in terror that he would die, or that reporting the injury would lead to political consequences. They treated him themselves, hiding the extent of his injuries, praying he would recover without complications. Across the hall, old Liu and his wife have been married for 40 years, since before the revolution, before the Civil War, before the Japanese invasion. They have survived everything through a combination of luck and political invisibility, never rising high enough to become targets, but never falling so low that they became vulnerable. They are quiet people who keep to themselves, and sometimes you hear them talking in the evenings, their voices soft, speaking in a dialect from their home province, preserving in language what cannot be preserved in any other way. These families, like yours, have become expert at dual existence, the public performance and the private reality, the revolutionary fervor demonstrated in meetings and the whispered doubts expressed behind closed doors, the careful calibration of how much truth to reveal and how much to hide.
Love, romantic love, has become complicated in ways that would have been unimaginable in earlier times. Your neighbor's niece, a young woman of 20, is in love with a man whose family background is problematic. His grandfather was a landlord before the revolution, which makes him a member of one of the 5 black categories, people classified as class enemies. The young woman cannot marry him without permission from her work unit, and that permission will not be granted because his background is bad. She could abandon him and find someone with better political credentials, someone whose family were poor peasants or workers, someone whose ancestors the revolution approves of. But she loves him, genuinely loves him, and so she is trapped between her feelings and the political reality. They meet in secret, brief encounters in parks or on streets where they hope not to be recognized, where they can spend a few moments together before the danger of being reported forces them apart.
Their letters to each other are written in code, innocent on the surface, but carrying deeper meanings that only they can decipher. Last month, the young woman discovered she was pregnant. This is a catastrophe, an unauthorized pregnancy with a man she cannot marry, evidence of behavior that will be classified as bourgeois immorality, grounds for dismissal from her work unit, and possible criminal charges. She went to an illegal clinic and had the pregnancy ended, a procedure that was dangerous and traumatic, and that she could speak of to no one except her aunt, who held her while she wept and promised to keep her secret. This is what love costs in Maoist China. Not just the political risk, but the human cost, the sacrifices demanded by a system that insists on controlling even the most intimate aspects of life. The young woman and her forbidden lover continue to meet, continue to hope that someday the political winds might shift enough to allow them to be together openly, but both know this hope is probably futile. Marriage has become a political calculation as much as an emotional bond. Parents arrange introductions between young people with compatible political backgrounds, children of workers meeting children of workers, children of poor peasants meeting children of poor peasants. Mixed-class marriages are discouraged or forbidden, ensuring that the categories of class identity reproduce themselves generation after generation. Your daughter is only 8, but you already think about this future, about what it will mean when she comes of age and wants to marry. Will she be able to choose based on love, or will political considerations override everything else? Will your family's background, neither perfectly proletarian nor dangerously bourgeois, limit her options? You hope that by the time she is old enough to marry, things will have changed, that the madness will have passed, that young people will be able to choose their partners based on affection and compatibility rather than class background and political credentials. But you do not really believe this hope. The revolution shows no signs of ending, and with each passing year, the control becomes tighter, the political categories more rigid.
Your mother dies on a cold February night, quietly in her sleep. You wake to find her gone, her body already cooling in the winter air, her face peaceful in a way it has not been for months. Your wife weeps silently, and you hold her, and together you prepare for what comes next. The funeral is small, restricted by regulations that condemn elaborate traditional ceremonies as futile waste. There is no Buddhist priest, no elaborate rituals, no burning of paper money to send with her to the afterlife. All of these have been banned. Instead, there is a brief memorial at the Neighborhood Revolutionary Committee's office, where a cadre reads a prepared statement about your mother's contribution to building socialism, words that have nothing to do with who she actually was. You bury her in a common cemetery on the outskirts of the city, a plot assigned by the state, marked with a simple stone bearing her name and dates. Your daughter cries throughout the burial, and you realize this is her first direct encounter with death, her first understanding that people she loves can disappear permanently. That night, you remember the box your mother told you about. You wait until everyone is asleep, then carefully pry up the floorboard beneath where her bed was. The box is small, wooden, old, and inside you find her treasures, a photograph of your father in his wedding clothes, wearing a traditional robe that would now be considered evidence of feudal thinking. Letters between your parents from their courtship, written in elegant classical Chinese that your daughter will never learn to read. A jade bracelet that belonged to your grandmother, an object of beauty that serves no revolutionary purpose. There are also documents, the title to the small shop your father owned before it was confiscated during the land reform, receipts for goods sold, evidence of a life that the revolution has declared never had value, that could be used to prove your family's bad background if anyone ever searched your apartment. You should destroy these things. Keeping them is dangerous, potential evidence that could be used against you or your children. But they are also all that remains of your parents' real lives, of the people they were before the revolution transformed them into class categories and political labels. You rewrap everything carefully and hide the box in a new location, inside a panel in the wall that you loosen and then refit. You will keep these things, at least for now, preserving what your mother wanted preserved, maintaining the connection to a past that the revolution wants to erase. In the morning, your daughter asks if grandmother is with the ancestors now. This is a traditional concept, the idea that the dead join the family's collective spirit, watching over the living. It has been condemned as superstition, as futile thinking, but children still ask such questions because the need to make sense of death transcends politics. Grandmother is at rest, you answer carefully, not confirming the traditional belief, but not denying it either. She lived a long life, and now she is at peace. Your daughter considers this, then says something that breaks your heart. Teacher Li says when revolutionaries die, they become part of Chairman Mao's spirit, living on through the revolution. Is grandmother part of Chairman Mao's spirit now? You do not know how to answer this, how to navigate between the absurdity of the claim and the political necessity of not contradicting what your daughter is taught in school. Your wife intervenes, saying gently that grandmother is wherever the dead go, and that we honor her memory by living good lives. It is the best answer you can give, vague enough to avoid political danger, honest enough to preserve some dignity, kind enough to comfort a child who has lost her grandmother.
Spring comes, and with it a brief relaxation of political tension. There are still meetings and study sessions and struggle campaigns, but the intensity decreases slightly, allowing small spaces where normal life can assert itself. Your wife plants seeds in a few clay pots she has gathered, placing them on the windowsill where they can catch sunlight. Growing food privately is technically prohibited. All agriculture should be collective, but everyone does it anyway, growing scallions or tomatoes or peppers in pots, supplementing their rations with whatever they can coax from tiny amounts of soil. The plants are pitiful things, struggling in inadequate soil with insufficient light, but they represent hope, the stubborn human insistence on creating and nurturing life, even in impossible conditions. Your wife tends them carefully, and your daughter watches, learning without words about persistence and care. One evening, unexpectedly, your son brings home a friend from school, a boy from another Red Guard faction. This is unusual. Your son rarely brings friends home, rarely reveals anything about his life outside family. But this boy is different, you can tell immediately. He is quieter than the other Red Guards you have encountered, more thoughtful, and he speaks to your wife with genuine politeness rather than the casual contempt that many young revolutionaries show toward their elders. The boys study together at your table, working through political texts, preparing for some upcoming campaign. But you notice that their conversations sometimes drift to other topics. A book one of them found, though he does not say where or what book, just that it was interesting. A question about mathematics that has no political content. Small moments of intellectual curiosity that exist outside the narrow boundaries of revolutionary orthodoxy. Later, after the friend has left, you ask your son about him. He seems like a good person. Your son nods, and for a moment his revolutionary mask slips. He is different from the others. He thinks about things. We talk sometimes about whether everything we are told is true. This admission is dangerous, evidence that your son is beginning to question, that doubt is creeping in around the edges of his revolutionary fervor. You should probably discourage this, remind him that questioning leads to trouble, but instead you simply nod, acknowledging what he has said without either encouraging or discouraging it. Be careful who you share such thoughts with, you say finally. I am always careful, he responds, and you believe him, because he has learned from watching you, from seeing how you navigate the political terrain, from understanding that survival requires masks within masks. This conversation is the closest you have come to honest communication with your son in years, and it gives you hope that beneath the Red Guard uniform and the revolutionary slogans, your actual child still exists, still thinks, still questions. He may be lost to you in many ways, transformed by the system into someone you barely recognize, but this moment suggests that the transformation is not complete, that recovery might be possible someday.
Your daughter learns to sing the songs your mother taught her, though she only sings them in private, in the apartment with the door closed. The songs are traditional folk songs, lullabies and festival songs from before the revolution, melodies that carry the weight of centuries. You listen to her singing while pretending not to listen, while appearing to be absorbed in some other task. Her voice is high and clear, and she gets some of the words wrong because she learned them by ear from an old woman whose own memory was fading. But the melodies are right, preserved through transmission from grandmother to granddaughter, one more thread connecting your daughter to a past the revolution cannot quite erase. These are the small resistances that families engage in, the forbidden songs taught in secret, the traditional foods prepared when ingredients can be obtained, the stories told in whispers, the values preserved despite political campaigns aimed at destroying them. Each family does this differently, and no family speaks of it openly, but everyone knows that everyone is doing it, that beneath the surface of revolutionary conformity, people are protecting what they can of the old culture. Your wife maintains her own acts of preservation. She has taught your daughter to make dumplings, the traditional method with the proper folds, even though cooking anything other than the simplest food is considered bourgeois. She has taught her to pour tea correctly, to serve guests with proper respect, to perform the small rituals of courtesy that were once central to Chinese culture. "Why do we do it this way?" your daughter asks when learning to pour tea. "Because this is how it has always been done," your wife answers. "Because your grandmother taught me, and her grandmother taught her, and your grandmother's grandmother taught her. When you pour tea this way, you are connected to all those women, all the way back." This is the language of tradition preserved through maternal teaching, passed from mother to daughter in unbroken chains that the revolution has tried to break, but cannot quite destroy. Your daughter may never understand the full significance of what she is learning, may never know how much has been lost or how precious these small preservations are, but she is learning nonetheless, absorbing without fully understanding, storing up knowledge that might one day be valued again. The quiet room, the private space where your family exists away from political performance, has become sacred in a way that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with humanity. Here, behind your closed door, you can be yourselves, tired, uncertain, sometimes afraid, but also loving, connected, committed to each other in ways that transcend politics. Here, your wife's hand in yours means what it has always meant: companionship, affection, shared life. Here, your children's questions can sometimes be answered honestly rather than politically. Here, your mother's memory can be honored not as a revolutionary who served the people, but as a woman who loved her family and who passed on what she could of the culture she inherited. The revolution will never know about this room, this space, these moments. They are not reported in any dossier, not recorded in any political file, not subject to any struggle session. They exist in the gaps between surveillance, in the hours after mandatory meetings, in the quiet of night when the loudspeakers finally stop broadcasting. And in these gaps, in these hours, in this quiet, love persists. Not the revolutionary love of collective struggle, not the abstract love of serving the people, but the ordinary human love of family and connection, of caring for those closest to you, of finding joy in small moments despite everything.
You stand at your window one evening, looking out at the darkened city, and you think about all the other families in all the other apartments, each maintaining their own quiet room, their own private space, their own small acts of preservation and resistance. You are not alone in this. Millions are doing the same thing, keeping humanity alive in the cracks of totalitarianism, refusing to be completely transformed into the revolutionary subjects the system demands. This thought comforts you more than any political ideology ever could. You are part of something larger, not the revolution or the party or the collective, but the quiet, persistent human refusal to be completely controlled, the stubborn insistence that some things matter beyond politics, that love and family and memory and tradition have value that no political campaign can erase.
Tomorrow you will wake to the loudspeakers. You will attend the meetings. You will perform loyalty and revolutionary consciousness. You will say what must be said and hide what must be hidden. But tonight, in this quiet room, you are simply yourself. A husband, a father, a son mourning his mother, a man trying to protect his family and preserve some fragment of humanity in impossible times. Your wife joins you at the window, and together you stand looking out at the dark city, at the million small lights in the million small windows where other families are doing the same thing, existing in the gaps, loving in the shadows, surviving. "Do you think it will ever end?" she asks quietly. "I don't know," you answer honestly, "but we endure, we continue, we protect what we can." She nods, leaning slightly against you, and you put your arm around her shoulders, and you stand together in the quiet room, in the private space that no one can take from you, being human in a system designed to make you otherwise. This is enough. It has to be enough. It is all you have. And somehow, against everything, it is enough to keep you going. One day at a time, one quiet room at a time, one small act of love and preservation at a time. The revolution continues outside your window, vast and impersonal and indifferent to individual suffering. But inside your apartment, in your quiet room, your private space, you have created something the revolution cannot quite reach. A family, a life, a love that persists despite everything. Sleep now, knowing that you have done what you could today, that you have protected your family as much as possible, that you have preserved some small pieces of humanity and culture and connection. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Tomorrow the performance will resume. But tonight you can rest in the quiet room, in the private space, in the knowledge that you are not alone, that millions are doing the same thing, that the human spirit is more resilient than any political system can fully suppress. Close your eyes. Let the exhaustion take you. Dream of a time when the quiet room might expand, when privacy might be possible, when love might not require hiding, when your children might grow up in a world that values humanity as much as it values ideology. It is a small dream, but in the quiet room, even small dreams are precious, worth preserving, worth protecting. Rest well. You have earned it.
If this journey through Maoist China has helped you understand the resilience of ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances, consider leaving a like to help others find these stories. Subscribe to continue exploring the daily lives of those who came before us. And in the comments, let us know what other difficult histories deserve to be remembered with honesty and compassion. Until then, may you never take for granted the freedoms you have, the privacy you enjoy, the ability to love without asking permission. Good night.